Chapter 1300. After buying clothes and medicine, Li Nanheng parked the car near the shopping mall and quickly went to buy everything he needed. When he returned, he saw that Feng Ling was still curled up there with her eyes closed as though she had fallen asleep. Li Nanheng stepped forward to help her over. He wanted to help her put medicine on her lower body before helping her change her clothes. After all, there might really be some lacerations down there. However, as soon as he helped her over, Feng Ling's head drooped weakly to his side. Li Nanheng paused and lowered his eyes to look at the person in his arms. The touch of his hand was unbelievably hot. He frowned and raised his hand to touch her forehead, neck, and back. It was very hot. Feng Ling, Li Nanheng quickly wrapped her up tightly with a thin blanket. Don't sleep. You have a fever. Feng Ling frowned slightly but could not open her eyes. However, she was still conscious in her heart. Ever since she returned to the Feng family, her stomach had bled and she had a high fever after 2 days of freezing rain. Although her body had recovered later, it was very easy for her to have a fever. Once there was any inflammation or cold, she would have a fever, and the fever was very severe. Jin Wan had said that this kind of phenomenon often occurred in medicine. It was the sequela of severe physical exhaustion. She would occasionally have this kind of situation. Usually, there was nothing wrong with her, but she was especially prone to a fever. As long as she had a fever, she would be in a daze until the fever subsided. In the year that Feng Ling was in England, she only fell ill once, and it was because the weather in London was wet and cold. That time, she went out early in the morning to do something and wore too little. When she got out of the car, it happened to be raining. She caught a cold and was drenched by the rain. After returning, she had a high fever for a day and a night. At that time, it was said that she was in a daze from the fever. Xiao Ba had been staying at her house to take care of her. When she woke up the next day, Xiao Ba said that she had a fever the night before. It was really scary. She didn't know if her fever was serious or not, but her eyelids were so heavy that she couldn't open them. Even though she knew who was hugging her and knew that she had to leave this bastard's car as soon as possible, she couldn't open her eyes. He didn't even need to think to guess that it was probably because he had injured her lower body. It was already difficult to talk about the injury, and now she had a fever. Li Nanheng saw that Feng Ling frowned slightly and knew that she was unwilling to go to the hospital. Although her body temperature was high, it was not too shocking. He simply wrapped her in a thin blanket with his coat, picked up the medicine and clothes, and carried her out of the car. There was a hotel behind. Without saying a word, Li Nanheng carried her into the hotel, booked a room, and placed her on the bed. After lying on the bed, Feng Ling seemed to be more comfortable than in the car, but she still frowned slightly and curled up in the thin blanket. She didn't know how long she was half asleep and half unconscious. Suddenly, she felt as though her body had entered a warm pool. Feng Ling's consciousness could not recover. She only felt as though she was being supported to sit in the bathtub. The warm water surrounded her and made her feel much more comfortable. Her body was gradually cleaned and refreshed. Li Nanheng let Feng Ling sit in the water. After patiently washing her by the bathtub, he wrapped her in a bath towel and carried her out. To prevent her fever from worsening, he placed her in his arms and took the hairdryer to dry her shoulder-length hair. After confirming that her hair was no longer wet, he placed her back on the bed. Her temperature was still very high. He called the hotel staff to buy antipyretic medicine and fed it to her. After drinking the medicine, she fell asleep again. He had to wait for her to sweat and her fever to subside, so he couldn't put on clothes for the time being and could only let her lie in the blanket. In her dreams, there were all kinds of people. It was what she had seen and heard in England. Feng Ling kept shuttling through the crowd in her dreams. She didn't know if she was looking for something or hiding from something. She just kept walking. When she suddenly bumped into a man's arms, she raised her eyes and saw Li Nanheng's face. Looking at that face, she couldn't remember what had happened. She only saw that the face in front of her eyes became clearer and clearer. It was so clear that her heart trembled. She turned to hide, but this man's face seemed to be everywhere in front of her. She was so angry that she kept running in the crowd, but no matter how far she ran, he was still there. The ghost lingered. In the end, Feng Ling was so angry that she suddenly took out a sniper rifle from her waist and kept shooting at the dozens of identical faces in front of her. Seeing that the faces were pierced by the bullets and exploded, she put down the gun and continued walking. However, as she walked, the faces that she had smashed gathered again and floated in front of her eyes. She was so angry that she raised her gun again and fired again, but the more bullets she fired, the more that bastardly Nanheng's face gathered in front of her. In fact, this face gradually gathered and turned into a human figure. The scene in front of her suddenly turned into that mountain, and then an off-road vehicle suddenly appeared in front of her. The gun in her hand silently melted. She was pushed into the car by the man who had transformed into her, and her clothes were torn apart. Feng Ling was so shocked that her hair stood on end. For a moment, she couldn't tell if it was a dream or reality. She instinctively kicked hard with her legs. However, with this kick, there seemed to be a hand on her feet that separated her legs. She was still immersed in the dream and kept struggling until a cold feeling suddenly came from her lower body. She shivered all over and abruptly pulled herself out of the dream of being pressed down by a man in the car, but for a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Her eyelids were unbelievably heavy, and only the most sensitive and slightly painful part of her lower body came from that place, which made her feel much more comfortable. After Feng Ling took the medicine and fell asleep, Li Nanheng applied medicine for her. Previously, when he helped her take a bath, he had noticed that her place was indeed red and swollen. When he helped her bathe, he tried not to hurt her. But now he had to help her apply medicine, so it was inevitable that he had to go deeper. At this moment, he saw that there were indeed some tears. Although it was not serious, he could see some faint traces of blood. It was probably because of this that she suddenly had a fever. Li Nanheng carefully helped her apply the ointment with one hand and firmly held her struggling leg with the other. Feeling that she seemed to be trembling because of this way of applying medicine, he looked up at her face and saw that her forehead was densely covered with a layer of sweat. Although her body was tense and her toes curled up because of the medicine, she still couldn't open her eyes. 4M. Chapter 1301. Sweating meant that the fever had subsided. Li Nanheng slowly put her leg down to avoid hurting her again. He covered her with the quilt again and reached out to touch her forehead. The temperature dropped a little, but it was still slightly higher than usual. Perhaps it was because of the burning pain down there, but now because of the cool mint of the ointment, it felt more comfortable. However, it was still a little uncomfortable. Feng Ling furrowed her brows in her sleep and rubbed her legs uncomfortably. Li Nanheng pressed her down, bent down to whisper against her lips, "Don't move. The medicine I just applied has an anti-inflammatory effect. It'll be fine tomorrow, okay?" As expected, Feng Ling didn't move anymore. She tilted her head and continued to sleep. Li Nanheng went to get a towel to help her wipe the sweat on her body. The afternoon passed and evening came. When it was dark, Feng Ling opened her eyes after a nap and saw the Nordic-style ceiling light in the hotel room. She was stunned for a long time before she seemed to smell food. She turned around and saw a hotel dining car placed by the bed. She moved a little and found that she was not wearing anything under the quilt. However, her body had been wiped clean after sweating, and it was very clean. Feng Ling glanced at the food on the dining car. She didn't need to guess to know what was going on. These were all the food she had ordered at the airport in the base cafeteria. It was Li Nanheng. Feng Ling closed her eyes and was about to sit up. At this moment, the door of the suite on the other side of the room opened, and the man's tall and straight figure came over. The moment she saw Li Nanheng's face, she recalled the scene she had experienced in the car, and her eyes instantly turned cold. "You're awake. Eat something." Li Nanheng didn't ask if she was still uncomfortable or in pain. As long as she didn't want to answer, it was useless to ask anything. It was better to let her eat to preserve her strength. As expected, Feng Ling didn't speak but just looked at him coldly. Li Nanheng came over and picked up a bowl of noodles on the dining car. He picked up some side dishes and put them on the plate. He sat by the bed and helped her up to eat. When he stretched out his hand, Feng Ling's expression shrank and she watched him warily. "Li Nanheng, eat first. I know you're angry, but don't make things difficult for your body. You can't return to the Feng family in your current state. Even if you want to kill me, scold me, or hit me, you have to have the strength to do it." Feng Ling said hoarsely, "Since you know that I want to beat you, scold you, and kill you, you still want to do such a thing?" Li Nanheng fed the noodles to her mouth and said calmly, "My self-control has never been effective in front of you. I used to endure it again and again. Today, I just didn't restrain myself. Don't you know how much of your words are deliberately provoking and angering me?" Feng Ling looked at him in disbelief. "Li Nanheng, do you mean you're in the right even though you raped me?" The man sent the noodles to her mouth and said softly, "Open your mouth." After speaking, Feng Ling closed her mouth and looked at him with pursed lips. She didn't open her mouth, so he wasn't in a hurry. He just looked at her patiently. "Not hungry. And stamina. Can you do it again?" Hearing that she could do it again, Feng Ling clenched her fists under the blanket and stared at him coldly for a long time. It wasn't until Li Nanheng broke the noodles that he unhappily picked up some more noodles and brought them to her mouth that she slowly opened her mouth and reluctantly ate the noodles. She chewed very slowly. Although the food in this hotel was not bad, the feeling of being fed by Li Nanheng bite by bite and the pain in her lower body even after being drugged reminded her how much of a beast this man was in the car on the mountain today. "Right, apply the medicine." Although she felt swollen and painful, it was not the kind of burning pain. The thing she felt in her sleep. She suddenly turned to look at the ointment by the side and saw that half of it had been used. He had helped her apply the ointment. He applied the medicine there. Feng Ling's face instantly turned red and she looked at him in disbelief. Li Nanheng seemed to know what she was thinking and didn't say anything, lest she would be more embarrassed. He continued to feed her until Feng Ling took a few more bites mechanically and picked up a few other dishes she liked to eat and brought them to her mouth. Perhaps it was because these were all her favorite foods in the past, but she hadn't eaten them much in the past year in England. After eating for a while, she finally had an appetite and Feng Ling no longer resisted. She didn't turn her head away until she was full and refused to eat anymore. Seeing that she was almost full, Li Nanheng let her go and took a tissue to wipe her mouth. If it weren't for the scene that happened on the mountain, Feng Ling would have thought that this man had changed from a domineering demon to a gentle and warm man just by looking at his patient and gentle side. Unfortunately, it was a pity that even if this man knelt down, he wouldn't be able to erase his beastly behavior today. After eating, get out of bed and see if you feel uncomfortable walking. Apply some medicine before going to bed at night. After using up this small tube of medicine, you should feel much better tomorrow morning. Li Nanheng pushed the dining cart aside and looked at Feng Ling. "Give me the medicine. I'll apply it myself." Feng Ling frowned. Li Nanheng's cold brows moved. "How are you going to do it yourself? Can you find it yourself? Can you see it?" "Feng Ling, it's not the first time. We were together many times when we were good. It's not like I didn't help you bathe in the jungle. I've seen everything that shouldn't be seen." Li Nanheng picked up the tube of medicine again and looked at it. At the same time, he said, "This medicine needs to be applied carefully and evenly. Are you sure you want to do it yourself?" Feng Ling expressionlessly snatched the tube of medicine from his hand and lowered her head to look at the dense English words on it. She was sure that he was right. She did need to apply it evenly and apply it to all the wounds inside. If it was her, she would not be able to do it herself. At the thought of how the man didn't take her to the hospital but went to the pharmacy to buy this medicine, she felt embarrassed. She simply threw the medicine back into his hand and didn't say anything. She leaned back on the bed and said, "Give me your phone." Li Nanheng stood up, took her phone, and handed it to her. Feng Ling took it and did not even look at him. Right now, she really couldn't go back to the Feng family. Her grandparents missed her every day. If she went back in such a sickly state, the two elders would probably be anxious again. She could only go back tomorrow when she was in a better state. She picked up her phone and saw that there were several missed calls. One was from Mr. Zand, 2 were from Jean Wan, and 2 were from Mr. Ian. There were also some unread text messages, mixed with Xiao Ba's text messages. W. 4M. Chapter 1302. Feng Ling leaned against the bed and replied to the messages one by one. Li Nanheng called the hotel staff to come in and push the dining cart away. After a while, someone came and the room returned to silence. Feng Ling had been lying on the bed, tightly covered with the blanket. Li Nanheng poured a glass of warm water and sat down by the bed. He placed the glass on the bedside table beside her. "Your body temperature is still around 37.5 degrees. It's still a low fever. Drink more water." Feng Ling did not respond, nor did she look up at him. She just remained silent. Li Nanheng sighed inwardly. The problem between him and Feng Ling was not particularly big. Back then, she was indeed very angry, but after all, it was not a matter of principle between the two of them. She was just angry that he did not even ask her before helping her make a decision for the future and removing her from the base. However, it was clear that he had raped her in the car. He had really committed a big crime. Because Feng Ling had been under the blanket and her fever had not completely subsided, she would occasionally sweat. Li Nanheng sat silently by the side and watched her. She ignored him and did not say anything, so he did not speak. Until he caught a glimpse of her sweating again, her long hair poking at her neck and shoulders because she was sitting on the edge of the bed. Although the hair around her neck looked particularly charming to men, it looked more like she should not be too comfortable. In the past, Feng Ling had short hair. When she was in the jungle, her hair was just over her chin. Now that her hair was considered long, Li Nanheng had never seen it on her. She kept looking at her phone. He watched her for a while and saw that she occasionally raised her hand to push the hair on her neck back. After doing this 2 or 3 times, Li Nanheng got up and left. Feng Ling didn't care where he went. After resting here for a night, she would return to the Feng family tomorrow and have nothing to do with him. After about 10 minutes, Li Nanheng returned. Feng Ling did not even look at him until the man walked back to the bed and said, "Sit up." Feng Ling looked up at him. "What are you doing?" However, he still subconsciously sat up from the bed. At this moment, the man walked around the side of the bed, leaned over, and lifted her hair that was always poking at her neck because of her sweat. Then she felt the man's somewhat clumsy movements as he helped her comb her hair. Feng Ling seemed to hear the sound of a rubber band being tossed back and forth in the man's hand. However, after fiddling with it for a long time, he still failed to help her tie her hair up. "Feng Ling, Li Nanheng, what are you doing?" She couldn't help asking coldly. After being tortured by her hair for a few minutes, the man still couldn't tie his hair into a proper ponytail. His cold brows furrowed as if he had encountered an epic problem. He said, I saw that your hair was poking at your neck, so I wanted to help you comb your hair. How do you use this thing? Fong Ling, Jin Wan had once used Li Nanheng to describe a straight man. Now she finally understood. Li Nanheng, who usually dealt with the internal and external injuries of various members of the base and could even wrap bandages like a doctor, was defeated by a rubber band that only women would use. So he went out just now to help her find something to comb her hair. Fong Ling raised her hand and took the rubber band from his hand. She said expressionlessly, "Let go of my hair. I'll do it myself." Hearing this, Li Nanheng seemed to be liberated and quickly let go. Then he saw Fong Ling skillfully comb the soft hair behind her head. The rubber band that was as difficult as ascending to heaven in his hands was casually done in her hands. After her hair was done, her neck was clean and comfortable. Fong Ling picked up her phone again and turned back to look at the man standing by the bed. He knew that he had done something wrong. Step by step to atone for his sins. What was the use? Fong Ling still ignored him, but when she sat back on the bed, she raised her head and tucked her hair behind her ear. Suddenly, she felt that when her hair was particularly short, she had never had this kind of trouble because of long hair. This was the first time she had combed her hair like this in front of Li Nanheng. She glanced at him again and asked, "Where did you get the rubber band?" "When I went downstairs, I met a 4-year-old girl who happened to be holding a bag of newly bought rubber bands. I bought a mini doll from the shopping cabinet in the hotel lobby for her and asked her to give me a rubber band," Li Nanheng said and sat back on the bed. A rubber band didn't even cost 50 cents. Generally, the things in the shopping cabinets in the hotel lobby were very expensive, and the original mini doll cost at least hundreds of yuan. Fong Ling was speechless about the rubber band on her head that was worth hundreds of yuan. "Mr. Li's equivalent exchange is really unusual," Fong Ling said mildly and sarcastically. Fong Ling's tone was indifferent, and she said mockingly, "But at least you know to exchange something with that little girl instead of shooting her. It seems that you're not as thorough as a beast." Li Nanheng's expression darkened. From today onwards, this woman had really equated him with a psychopath who would forcibly seize things from others. He was not annoyed. He picked up the tube of ointment. "I see that you've been looking at your phone idly. I think you're going to sleep soon. Why don't you apply the ointment again?" As soon as she heard that he wanted to apply the ointment, Fong Ling's slightly cold and mocking manner instantly disappeared, and she looked at him with a tense expression. Li Nanheng played with the tube of ointment and looked straight into her eyes with a faint smile. "At least I know to take care of you before separating your legs, instead of directly breaking them open. It seems that I'm indeed not as thorough as a beast." Fong Ling's fingers tightened and she looked at him coldly. "Li Nanheng, you brought me back from England and tortured me like this. Are you very proud of yourself?" The man looked into her eyes. "You've been expelled from 11 base, and I've also expelled myself. From the age of 13 to the age of 23, you, Fong Ling, have been rooted here for 10 years. In the end, you said that you can attend a dinner party with another man and casually have a candlelight dinner with roses. You're very proud to see me being provoked, aren't you?" As he spoke, Li Nanheng leaned forward on the chair and looked into her eyes at close range. "I've loved you for 10 years. Did I agree to break up with you just because you said so?" N. Li Ha, Daddy T_T. I'm already working hard to atone for my sins. Yesterday, I really couldn't hold it in. Please forgive me, Daddy. It's the beginning of the month. Please throw the monthly ticket at me. Please, 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 W. 4M. Chapter 1303. I've loved you for 10 years. Did I agree to break up with you just because you said so? N. Li Nanheng was not a person who was obsessed with a certain topic. After speaking, he got up to answer the phone and did not mention it again after returning. On the contrary, when Feng Ling slept at night, the moment she closed her eyes, these words echoed in her ears. In the middle of the night, the room was very quiet. This bed was very big, but Li Nanheng did not want to provoke her anymore, so he simply let her sleep alone. He sat on the sofa by the window and fell asleep at some point. Feng Ling had a dream. She dreamed of the 10 years after she met Li Nanheng in the orphanage. After waking up, she could not fall asleep. She sat up on the bed and looked at the man who had fallen asleep on the sofa. After watching for a while, she lowered her eyes, lifted the blanket, and got out of bed. She walked over and stood in front of the man, watching him sitting there sleeping. After watching for a long time, she picked up the thin blanket on the other side of the sofa and gently covered him. After covering him, she leaned over and watched the man with his eyes closed. Li Nanheng, I once spent so many years in 11 base. I thought I would take root there, but in the end, that path was still broken. I have no way back. Feng Ling looked at his sleeping face and said quietly and lightly, You were the one who helped me choose this path. I can't give up halfway. I want to go back and be the towering tree of the Feng family as you wish. I don't know if I can support the Feng family, but I will work hard. After speaking, Feng Ling turned to pick up her clothes and change. She then picked up her phone and his electronic car key and left the hotel. She went to the car to retrieve her luggage, passport, and other things. Then she placed the electronic car key at the front desk of the hotel and asked them to return it to Li Nanheng. When Feng Ling left the hotel room, it was 2:30 in the morning. She put on her clothes and went out. When the door opened and closed, the man on the sofa slowly opened his eyes. Feng Ling sat in the taxi. The sky outside was still dark. After all, the sky had not brightened yet. Unknowingly, dawn was approaching. She arrived at the entrance of the Feng family's villa in New York. Not many people knew that she had returned. After all, Li Nanheng had suddenly brought her back. The Feng family members were even more clueless. She didn't want to disturb everyone's rest, so she got out of the car alone with her suitcase. When she walked into the Feng family's door, Auntie Mai, who had woken up early to prepare breakfast with the servants, saw her. She immediately thought that she had seen wrongly and called out in disbelief, "Second miss?" At the same time, a person walked down the stairs from the second floor. Qin Shuk had been studying abroad for the past 2 years and had just returned to America. She had yet to recover from the jet lag and had woken up very early. As she went downstairs, she yawned and rubbed her eyes. All of a sudden, she heard Auntie Mai scream and her hand trembled. She abruptly put down her hand and met Feng Ling's gaze. Looking at Feng Ling, who had long hair and was dressed in women's clothes, Qin Shuk staggered and almost fell down the stairs. Her eyes widened. "Ah, you!" When she heard that Feng Ling was a woman and the second daughter of the Feng family, she didn't believe it. However, there had been too many complicated things happening in the Feng family in the past 2 years, so she couldn't comment too much. She just stayed here for a few days after returning to China. After all, when she was young, she often hung out with Qin Chou's mother and the 2 elders of the Feng family. Even though her surname was Qin, she was only a cousin, but she had always been very familiar with the Feng family. She was even more familiar with them than her own family. Now that she suddenly saw a living Feng Ling in women's clothes, Qin Shuk was so shocked that she couldn't close her mouth for a long time. She stared blankly at her, looking at her from head to toe, and then from toe to head several times. Feng Ling shifted her gaze away from Qin Shuk and nodded at Auntie Mai. "I rushed back overnight and didn't inform anyone. We'll talk about it after Grandpa and Grandma wake up. You can do whatever you need to do. Don't worry about me." Give me your luggage first. You must be tired after coming back so late. Hurry back to your room to rest or sit for a while. When the two elders wake up, let's eat breakfast. Second miss, this is your first breakfast. The preparations we've prepared are too simple. Wait until noon or evening, Auntie Mai returned to her senses and quickly stepped forward to take the suitcase from Feng Ling's hand. The old master and the old madam are old and usually wake up very early. They should be awake soon. Give me your luggage first. We've prepared too simple. Wait for noon or evening, No need, Auntie Mai. I'm not picky. Feng Ling smiled at her. She knew that the people of the Feng family were truly good to her. When she first returned to the Feng family, she was still a little distant. However, as time passed, because she could feel that they were sincere to her, she gradually integrated into this family and got along well with Auntie Mai. Auntie Mai was a little excited. She raised her hand to wipe the tears from the corner of her eyes. Second miss, it's not easy for you. You left home for 20 years at such a young age. As soon as you returned home, you had to shoulder such a heavy burden. Before you could enjoy the warmth of your family, you were sent to England to study. Now that you're finally back, can you finally have a good rest? Young people have limitless prospects. Don't work too hard. Feng Ling nodded. Thank you, Auntie Mai. I'll rest at home for a few days. Don't worry. Okay. I'll go prepare breakfast. Auntie Mai chuckled and quickly turned to go to the kitchen. She turned to see that the Qin family's young lady was still in a daze on the stairs. She could tell that her eyes were only filled with surprise. She smiled and went to do her own things. At this moment, Feng Ling turned to look at Qin Shuk. Qin Shuk widened her eyes for a long time. Seeing that she finally had a chance to interrupt, she quickly raised her hand and stared at him in surprise. You, Feng Ling tilted her head slightly and glanced at her with a faint smile. Miss Qin, long time no see. Seeing that Feng Ling was actually smiling, Qin Shuk instantly raised her hand to cover her chest. Oh my god, you actually know how to smile. Feng Ling. Why couldn't she smile? But you're really a woman. Qin Shuk exclaimed as she walked down quickly. She walked up to Feng Ling and circled around her several times. She sized her up. TSK, you're really a woman. And you know how to smile. You're so beautiful. If you were still the little brother I liked, I would have fainted on the spot if you smiled at me like that. But you're actually a woman. Chapter 1304. Feng Ling curved her lips and looked at her from the corner of her eye. So what if I'm a woman? Can't you faint when a woman smiles at you? Hey, stop. Qin Shuk raised her hand and gestured for her to stop. Little Feng Ling, oh, no, it's not little brother Feng Ling. It's cousin Feng Ling. Yes, cousin. You and Feng Mingzhu are both my cousins. But you shouldn't be much older than me, right? As she spoke, she looked at Feng Ling up and down for a while. Perhaps you're my cousin. You're still young. Be careful. Now that you're a woman, don't speak with such a seductive expression. Do you know that you're my first love? Do you know that my heart is bleeding when you stand in front of me dressed like this and with such long hair? My youth, my budding feelings, actually fell into the hands of a woman disguised as a man. I can't accept it. Although Qin Shuk strongly expressed her unwillingness, she only kept walking back and forth in front of Feng Ling. From time to time, she would clench her fists angrily to express her unhappiness. However, this caused Feng Ling to be unable to hold back the polite smile on her face. After thinking for a moment, she picked up her phone and handed it to her. Seeing her actions, Qin Shuk instantly raised her eyebrows. "What are you doing? Didn't you dream of getting my phone number back then?" Feng Ling tilted her head. "Take it. Remember it yourself." Qin Shuk. Although she looked very unwilling, Qin Shuk turned her head away with an arrogant expression. "Who wants your phone number, especially since you're still a woman? Let me tell you, my sexual orientation is very normal. I'm only interested in little brothers." With that, she suddenly reached out and took Feng Ling's phone. She quickly and decisively pressed a number. When her own phone rang, Qin Shuk saved her number in Feng Ling's phone. The name saved in the address book was, "The Invincible Beautiful Little Cutie Qin Shuk." Feng Ling. After that, Feng Ling returned to her room. Qin Shuk was still unwilling to give up and kept asking her when she was born. She had been wondering whether Feng Ling was her cousin or her cousin. When the old man and the old lady woke up and saw that Feng Ling had returned, they were extremely excited and rushed to Feng Ling's room to talk to her. Qin Shuk could not interrupt and could only sit by the side and stare at Feng Ling from time to time, occasionally adding a sentence. When it was time for breakfast, Qin Shuk took the opportunity to ask about Feng Ling's real birthday. In the end, when she learned that Feng Ling was half a year older than her, she immediately held her chin with one hand and sighed. "Oh, so you still have to call me cousin." Back then, Feng Ling didn't particularly dislike Qin Shuk, this enthusiastic little girl. This kind of straightforward person made people feel relaxed. She rarely interacted with others, but Feng Ling treated Qin Shuk better and could chat with her at the dining table. "I didn't expect the cold little brother in the past to be so approachable now." Qin Shuk sighed. "It's a pity that she's a woman." "Shuk, what are you saying?" Old Madame Feng didn't know that Qin Shuk had liked Feng Ling. She thought she was stirring up trouble and quickly glared at her. Qin Shuk immediately stuck out her tongue at Feng Ling. Feng Ling also curved her lips lightly. "Grandma, it's okay. Cousin Shuk is joking with me." Seeing that Feng Ling didn't mind, old Madame Feng was relieved. After all, Shuk often hung out with Mingzhu. Although Qin Shuk was straightforward and didn't have many thoughts, she was afraid that she would be dissatisfied with Feng Ling because of Feng Mingzhu. But now it seemed that she was overthinking. Qin Shuk actually liked Feng Ling. Since their relationship could be very harmonious, she might as well strike while the iron was hot. "Shuk, haven't you finished all your advanced courses outside?" Old Madame Feng asked as she picked up some food for Qin Shuk. "Shouldn't you settle down in America? I don't think you like to return to Los Angeles. Why don't you find something to do in New York?" Qin Shuk raised her brows. "Sure. I don't want to go back to Los Angeles anyway. My parents are too naggy. They've been nagging me since I was young. I still want to be outside by myself." Grandmother Feng nodded and turned to look at Feng Ling, who was eating quietly. Shu Ke also majored in business. "If you take over the Feng family's companies, she can help you. You two little sisters can help each other. This way, it's better than going alone." Grandmother Feng nodded and turned to look at Feng Ling, who was eating quietly. "Oh," Qin Shuk raised her brows. "Grandaunt, so you want me to accompany cousin Feng Ling to help you manage the Feng family's companies?" Old Madame Feng immediately smiled and glanced at her. "Why? You don't want to?" Qin Shuk blinked and turned to look at Feng Ling. "I'm fine with anything. It just depends on whether cousin is willing to let me stay by her side to help." Feng Ling put down the cutlery in her hand and looked at Qin Shuk seriously for a while. Then she asked, "I'm definitely willing. But before I let you stay, I have to confirm one thing." "What is it?" Cousin, tell me. There's nothing wrong with your sexual orientation, right? Qin shook, grandfather Feng and grandmother Feng. Qin shook rolled her eyes at the plate in front of her. Don't worry, I like men. And then let's go together. Feng Ling looked calm. Qin shook rolled her eyes at him again and gritted her teeth. How infuriating. Why did she give Feng Ling the impression that she was a lesbian? She definitely only liked men, okay? Back then, she liked the little brother version of Feng Ling. Now that she had such a powerful cousin, not to mention that she didn't have this sexual interest, even if her brain was flooded and she really liked women, she probably wouldn't be able to handle someone like Feng Ling. Old Madame Feng smiled and turned to grandfather Feng. Young people nowadays talk about things we don't understand. Grandfather Feng also looked at Feng Ling with a smile. It's good that Shook is helping you. We can be more at ease. Don't quarrel with each other. If there's anything unpleasant, just tell us. We watched Shook grow up and know her temper. She doesn't have any complicated thoughts. She's just a little impatient. Feng Ling, please be more tolerant of her. If you can't take it anymore, tell us. It's good enough that cousin doesn't bully me. You actually said that I have a bad temper? Qin Shook was unhappy. She turned to look at Feng Ling. With her skills, I can't even beat 10 of her. What else can I do to her? No matter what, I'm the one who's at a disadvantage, okay? Chapter 1305. Feng Ling smiled. I won't hit you. Look. Her words are clearly a threat. She's reminding me that she really knows how to hit people. Qin Shook really couldn't eat anymore. She came from 11 base. Great aunt, I'm the one who you have to stand up for. It's me. It's not her. All right. Matriarch Feng couldn't stop laughing. I think the two of you will get along very well in the future. I don't care anymore. Go deal with the relationship between you two sisters. Let's eat. Qin Shook picked up the cutlery again and glared at Feng Ling across the table. Feng Ling only smiled and ignored her occasional childish temper. Feng Ling rested for a day at the Feng family's residence and went to the companies under the Feng Corporation's name in New York the next day. As the Feng family's business had failed in recent years, there were many small companies that needed to be integrated. In the past, it was the Feng Corporation, but now it was just a bunch of small companies. Some made money, and some did not. The two elders were old and did not have the energy to manage too much. They could only maintain the profits on the surface, but they could not continue to do more. Feng Ling and Qin Shook sat in the car and looked at the information about all the companies under the Feng family's name. The driver sent by the Feng family drove quietly in front. Although Qin Shook usually looked like a carefree child, when it came to doing things, she was very serious. Especially when she sat in the car with Feng Ling to discuss the various plans the Feng family was facing, she had many unique opinions with Feng Ling. Then let's do it this way. When they arrived at the company's headquarters in New York, the car was parked outside. Feng Ling put the information aside in the car. I'm still a beginner in these areas. I'm not like you, who have studied business and finance for many years. Furthermore, you've studied abroad and have practical experience. The two of us will follow the plan step by step. First, we'll transfer the company's management, and then we'll start step by step. All right, didn't you study in London for a long time? What I've learned in the past 5 years can't even compare to what you've learned in the outside world for a year. Let's support each other a little. There's absolutely no problem. Qin Shook blinked at her. One is quiet, one is active. Even when we go out to discuss clients, we can complement each other. Don't worry, I'll definitely stand on the same side as you and help you take back all the power of the Feng Corporation. Feng Ling smiled. Then how should I thank you? I remember that apart from Li Nanheng, there was a little brother who often appeared with you, right? Qin Shuk whispered into Feng Ling's ear, that little brother is also quite handsome, but compared to you in men's clothes, he's still inferior. But in the end, you're a woman. You're beautiful to the bone and not the skin. It's only natural that you're inferior to him. Thinking about it, that little brother's looks are not bad and his personality is also good. Introduce him to me later. Feng Ling, she tried her best to recall and felt that the person Qin Shuk was talking about was K. Feng Ling smiled. All right, you have good taste. I'll find a chance to introduce you. Deal. Let's go. I'll accompany you to the Feng Corporation to kill the enemy. 10 months. From the time Feng Ling returned to America to taking over all the businesses under the Feng family, she spent 3 months to take back the power of the company and reorganize the company into a corporation. She spent another 2 months to change the company from inside to outside, replacing it with a group of people who were capable and obedient. She also asked for the resignation of all the old people who were domineering in the company. She spent a total of 10 months to finally gain a foothold in the Feng Corporation. The companies under the Feng Corporation had also returned to the right track a few months ago. In the company, Feng Ling was looking at a financial data. She recalled some of Jean Wan's habits of checking the financial accounts and imitated her. She didn't expect it to be useful. This way of checking the accounts was very effective. All the loopholes could be seen at a glance. Qin Shuk came in with a tablet and read the media's awards for the Feng Corporation's outstanding performance this year. No one dares to believe that a person who has never come into contact with business can stand firm in the business world with such a terrifying momentum. There are all kinds of rumors about this woman named Feng Ling. It's said that she was once the daughter of the Feng family who was lost outside. Later, what's the point of reading these gossip news every day? Feng Ling continued to look at her financial report without looking up. These media outlets have made up all kinds of stories about you. I'm reading the different versions of you written by these people every day. Qin Shuk walked over with a smile and put down the tablet. By the way, when you were answering the internal call in the office, another call came in. It seems to be from the Dr. Qin you mentioned before. Speaking of this Dr. Qin, I've heard you mention him a few times. His surname is also Qin. Hey, should you introduce him to me one day? It's not easy to meet someone with the same surname in America. Hearing that it was Dr. Qin, Feng Ling raised her head and glanced at her. Dr. Qin, don't even think about it. It's impossible for him to be with you. Tisk, I've been thinking about seducing little brother K. How could I seduce Dr. Qin? I like all kinds of little brothers, but I also have my principles, okay? Qin Shuk rolled her eyes at her and looked at the time. Dr. Qin called about 10 minutes ago. Do you want to call him back? I'll call back later. Feng Ling lowered her head to look at the report again. Qin Shuk had pulled her long hair to do a new style not long ago. It was slightly curled and scattered behind her back. When she went to get her hair done, it was because she wanted to meet a long-term client. Qin Shuk said that she looked like a little girl all day long and looked easy to bully, so she took her to have her hair permed. Feng Ling gradually got used to it. Occasionally, when she looked at herself in the mirror, which was completely different from the short-haired tomboy in the past, she would be absent-minded and wonder if the woman in the mirror was still herself. When Qin Shuk went out to prepare for the executive meeting, Feng Ling put down the report in her hand, picked up her phone, and called Dr. Qin. Hello, Dr. Qin, what's the matter? Hearing the man's words, Feng Ling's hand, which had just put down the report, stiffened. Jean Wan. How did she get shot? Is it serious? Where? Los Angeles. Chapter 1306. Fong Ling had planned to return to England to stay with Mr. Zand for a few days, but Jean Wan's sudden accident disrupted her original plan. If it was just a minor injury, it would be fine, but Dr. Chin had specially flown to America from High City and would transfer to Los Angeles in New York. If it wasn't a big deal, Dr. Chin wouldn't have told her to be mentally prepared. Because Jean Wan had been shot by a gunshot, and it was about 3 inches below her neck. That kind of place was almost fatal. She stood up in fear. She didn't even have time to change her clothes or pack her things and walked out. "Hey, where are you going?" Chin Shuk was still outside and hadn't walked far. Hearing the sound of the door opening, she turned to see Fong Ling walking out quickly. Fong Ling had never been used to wearing high heels, but on some occasions, she had to wear them to match her clothes. She was wearing high heels today. Usually, as long as she wore high heels, she wouldn't walk very fast, but today, she walked like the wind. "A friend is seriously injured. I have to go to Los Angeles now. I'll go with Dr. Chin later. Help me take care of the company for a few days." Fong Ling left in a hurry without looking back. Hearing the seriousness in her tone, Chin Shuk quickly followed. "Who? Seriously injured in Los Angeles? Is it Li Nanheng?" Fong Ling's voice was heavy. "Jean Wan." Chin Shuk paused in her steps. "Jean Wan." No wonder Fong Ling was so anxious. This was not the first time Fong Ling had heard of this Mrs. Mo. She was truly one of the few good friends she had in her life. Knowing that Chin Shuk was very reliable, Fong Ling was very relieved about New York. She went to the underground parking lot, changed into flat shoes in the car, and drove all the way to the airport. When she arrived at the airport, Chin Sighting had just gotten off the plane and was preparing to go to Los Angeles. The two of them met and didn't have time to exchange pleasantries. They chose the nearest flight together. In the waiting hall, Fong Ling was still answering a call from the company. Chin Sighting went to buy 2 cups of coffee. Seeing that Fong Ling was busy, he didn't say much. He glanced at the time and saw that there was still half an hour before boarding time. He placed the coffee in his hand on the seat next to her. Fong Ling put down the phone and turned to look at the coffee by the side. She then glanced at Chin Sighting. "Sorry, Dr. Chin. I have something to do at the company. I've only taken over for a few months. I still have a lot to deal with. It doesn't matter. You must be much busier than before." Chin Sighting smiled understandingly. "Back then, you were still a little Fong Ling who only listened to orders in 11 base. Now that you've grown up, you're CEO Fong." Fong Ling sighed with a smile. "What do you mean by always?" To let a person who knows nothing about these things forcibly cut off everything in the past, swallow it whole, and relearn these things that he has never come into contact with before, to me, it's just a heavy burden that I have no choice but to carry on my shoulders. Chin Sighting held the coffee in his hand and was not in a hurry to drink it. He just looked at her. "So, it was Li Nanheng who cut off the past for you. That's why you've been ignoring him like this." "Not just that. That bastard had kidnapped her from England 10 months ago and had tortured her in the car for a few hours. It was so painful that she was still scared when she thought about it. I didn't leave anyone hanging." Fong Ling also picked up the coffee, opened the lid on the cup, and gently blew on it. Her movements were quiet and natural, and then she curved her lips, but the smile did not reach her eyes. "But after all, he was the one who helped me choose this path. Returning to the Fong family and returning to New York are all according to the path I have to take now. If I give up halfway because of him, or if he regrets halfway and comes to disturb my current life, then I'm afraid there's something wrong with his IQ. Of course, she knew what Li Nanheng was thinking. She didn't do anything, nor did she make a fuss in front of him. She just followed the path that he had chosen for her and walked on it. As for Li Nanheng, he just swallowed his blood. He couldn't see or touch it. He could suffocate to death every day. What was there to be angry about? This silent punishment was enough. Feng Ling took a sip of coffee and didn't want to talk about Li Nanheng anymore. She only asked, "What do you think about Jin Wan's injury?" "I've called a friend in the hospital where she is now. She is injured in the head and the central nervous system of her spine." When Qin Sighting mentioned Jin Wan, his expression became slightly serious. After all, it was really a matter of life and death. "I'm not optimistic about the current emergency treatment. It's very likely that she won't be able to survive." Hearing this, Feng Ling's brows furrowed imperceptibly, and her grip on the coffee cup tightened. Early in the morning, Qin Sighting, who flew from New York to Los Angeles overnight, rushed to the hospital. The lights in the emergency room were on until the next morning. When Qin Sighting arrived, Jin Wan had not come out of the emergency room. "How long has she been in there?" Qin Sighting walked over and asked. Li Nanheng held a cigarette in his hand, but he didn't smoke it. "He just sat here with Mo Jingshan all night." He glanced at Qin Sighting and said lightly, "It's been more than 12 hours. 12 hours. She hadn't been declared dead yet. Under normal circumstances, it might be possible to save her. Otherwise, she wouldn't have lasted so long." Qin Sighting nodded. "When I saved your life with Dr. Wendell in Los Angeles, Dr. Wendell was very skilled in removing bullets from dangerous parts. At that time, I just cooperated with him in the operating room. Now, even without me, I believe he has enough ability to save Jin Wan. After all, it's been so long, and he hasn't given up yet. Let's wait a little longer." Although Li Nanheng's skills were excellent, he had participated in countless missions in 11 base and suffered many injuries. He had experienced life and death more than once or twice. Even he couldn't remember how many times this Dr. Wendell in Los Angeles had helped him remove bullets. "Am I the one in a hurry now?" Li Nanheng pointed with his chin in the direction of the stone on the bench outside the emergency room. Mo Jingshan was stained with Jin Wan's blood, which had dried up, but he hadn't been pushed out yet. Just overnight, Mo Jingshan's chin had some stubble, and his body was covered with blood. He was so miserable that even Qin Sighting couldn't recognize him. When the doctor finally came out and announced the success of the operation, but Mo Jingshan was still in a very critical period and had to be sent directly to the ICU and couldn't be visited for the time being, everyone outside, although they didn't say much, was obviously relieved. At least the operation was successful. It was much better to survive the critical period than to be declared dead on the spot. In this way, at least Jin Wan could survive a few more days with her own vitality. W. 4M. Chapter 1307. Kay asked Qin Sighting why Feng Ling didn't come to the hospital. Didn't he say that he would bring Feng Ling here when he transferred to New York? Qin Sighting spread his hands. "We did fly here together, but after landing, she disappeared. I was in a hurry to get to the hospital and didn't go to find her." Kay, Nanheng had been waiting for Feng Ling to appear, but after waiting for a long time, she didn't come to the hospital. In this operation, he was ordered to go back to the base to mobilize people, planes, vehicles, and guns. After all, Nanheng had personally dealt with the things in Cambodia, and now he had to go back to Atuta himself. After Jin Wan was injured, Atuta had been caught and locked up in the base. Now there was no time to waste, and he should go back to the base, but he had received accurate information that Feng Ling would come with Qin Sighting this morning. But she didn't show up. Time passed bit by bit, and Jin Wan had been sent to the ICU ward. It was quiet outside the emergency room. Li Nanheng stared at the door of the hospital. Under the repeated urging of the bass, he threw his cell phone into his pocket and left expressionlessly. However, less than 5 minutes after Li Nanheng left the hospital, a slender figure in a black wraparound dress appeared in front of the hospital. Seeing that Li Nanheng's car had gone far away, she entered the hospital. Feng Ling was still wearing the clothes she had worn in the company. She wore a black O-style suit jacket outside the wraparound dress. She didn't deliberately hide from Li Nanheng, but after getting off the plane, she received a call from the company. There was a very serious personnel change that needed her to hold a meeting immediately, so she specially found a quiet lounge and communicated with the personnel department on the phone for a while. After finishing her work, Qin Siding had left because the hospital was very urgent, but he sent her a text message and wrote down the location of the hospital. When Feng Ling rushed over, she heard 2 doctors talking about Jin Wan outside the hospital. When she learned that Jin Wan's operation was successful but she was still in critical condition, she was a little relieved. At the same time, she saw Li Nanheng inside, so she didn't go in. Instead, she went out to buy some fruit from a fruit shop. After Li Nanheng left, she came in. There were still many old friends from the base here. Not wanting to be recognized, she put on a pair of sunglasses. Kay had just answered the phone and was about to come out of the hospital when he suddenly saw a woman with long wavy curly hair, dressed very feminine, and wearing sunglasses walking in. He didn't pay much attention to her. After all, there were many beautiful women in Los Angeles, and such enchanting and charming women were not uncommon. However, at the moment when he brushed past the woman, his footsteps abruptly slowed down. As if struck by lightning, he stiffly turned around to look at the back of the woman who was somewhat strange but also extremely familiar to him. He asked in surprise, "Feng Ling. You can even recognize me like this?" They had indeed grown up together. They were too familiar with each other. Feng Ling felt helpless. She turned her head and smiled at Kay. Kay immediately let out a F***CK, and his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Damn it, Feng Ling had sneaked into their base since she was 13 years old. They had been through life and death together for 10 years. Even if he later found out that Feng Ling was a woman, he wouldn't be as surprised as he was now. When had he ever seen Feng Ling so feminine? Was this really Feng Ling? There were times when they hadn't seen each other for a long time, but at that time, she was still her, but now her entire aura had changed completely. 2 years ago, Kay also saw that Feng Ling's hair had grown a lot, but it was still very natural. For these old friends in the base, it was not too strange. But now Feng Ling, her hair reached her shoulders. Although it was still black, it was simply permed into a natural curl, and the undyed long hair fell on her shoulders simply and elegantly. He couldn't tell if it was simple, clean, or charming. In short, all kinds of states that he had never seen before were now on Feng Ling. Kay was so shocked that his jaw almost dropped. What the F***CK? He was used to seeing her like a tomboy in the past. He only knew that her skin was very fair and her facial features were very beautiful, but now he knew that the national treasure of their base, Feng Ling, was actually so beautiful. When he remembered that when he went on a mission with her, he had to lie in the dark ditch with her all night because of his injury, Kay swallowed hard. How slow-witted was he to treat Feng Ling as his bro? If she had appeared in front of him like this back then, she would definitely be a goddess for a lifetime, okay? Li Nanheng was really shrewd. He had taken her down early. Otherwise, if the brothers in the base saw her like this, they would all pounce on her like wolves and tigers. But now with boss's name blocking them, who the F***CK dared to have any thoughts about her? Kay, how is Mrs. Mo? Feng Ling only knew that Jin Wan was sent to the ICU and had spent some time outside. She didn't know how the progress was now. Anyway, she had already recognized Jean Wan, so she simply asked directly. Kay suddenly came back to himself and hurriedly explained the situation, but his eyes were still fixed on her. He remembered that he had seen Fong Ling dressed in women's clothes before, but at that time, her hair was still short. Now, seeing that the shock in Kay's eyes had not subsided, Fong Ling smiled at him. I see. I'll go see her. You can't see her. Now Mr. Mo can't even get close to the ICU. There are several isolation areas outside the sterile ward of this hospital. We can't get close to them, and the brothers here can only guard outside the isolation area. Fong Ling nodded, didn't say more, and turned to walk in. Kay opened his mouth and was about to say something, but when the words came to his mouth, he remembered that Boss Lee had just left. She only appeared after he left. Obviously, she didn't want to see him. It seemed that there was no need for him to say more. After all, Boss rarely returned to the base now. Few people knew what was going on between them, and Fong Ling didn't like others to meddle in her business. She didn't know if Boss Lee had ever seen such a feminine Fong Ling. After so long, Boss Lee must have been tortured by Fong Ling. If he saw Fong Ling dressed like this, it was as if she was a completely different person from before. It was likely that many men would fall in love with her. This Boss Lee was probably going to go crazy. W. 4M. Chapter 1308. Jean Wan didn't wake up in the ICU for 3 days. It was said that Mr. Mo sat outside like this for 3 days and barely slept. Although Mr. Mo had a strong heart, Jean Wan had once said that Mo Jingshan was so calm that he didn't look like a human. But right now, Mr. Mo had completely lost his composure. He was disheveled and dispirited. He was covered in Jean Wan's blood, but he didn't wash it. Stubble almost covered his entire chin. He didn't speak or eat. He just sat there, waiting. Everyone was worried that if Jean Wan really didn't wake up, would Mr. Mo collapse. Everyone was trying to persuade him, but Mo Jingshan, who had always been calm and composed and could easily control everything in his hands, seemed to have lost all his godhood in the past 3 days after Jean Wan took the bullet for him, leaving only a shell that was powerless to fight against life and fate. Finally, Chin Sighting found a way to take Mr. Mo to an empty ward to let him rest. It wasn't easy to let Mr. Mo sleep. However, that night, some of Atuda's men sneaked into the hospital, kidnapped the medical staff on other floors, disguised themselves as medical staff, and took Jean Wan away from the ward. The isolation area inside was too far and too long for the members of 11 Base to approach. When they found out, Jean Wan was already gone. When Fong Ling learned of the news, Chin Sighting had already taken the lead to chase after her, but there was still no news. Fong Ling was in a hotel near the hospital and was still negotiating with the company's executives in New York about the personnel change. When she suddenly heard the news, she turned on the computer and quickly contacted Dr. Chin. Chin Sighting was still driving outside. From the sound of the car, it seemed that he was chasing and racing. In order not to affect their chase, Fong Ling asked about the situation briefly. After understanding everything, she asked if there was anything she could help. Chin Sighting told her to wait for news. After that, Fong Ling waited in the hotel. In the end, she couldn't wait any longer, so she went to the hospital. She looked around the ward and saw several old friends in the base. The old acquaintances in the base were Kay, Han Jin, and Xiao Su. As for the other 3 snipers in Terran City, they had just been sent out on a mission last month and had not returned. When Kay returned to the hospital to arrange for a pincer attack, he saw Fong Ling and quickly pulled her over. "It's great that you're here." Without a word, he abruptly handed a sniper rifle to Fong Ling. Come. Quick, I'll give it to you first." What are you doing? Feng Ling hadn't touched a gun for a long time. Suddenly, a long and heavy sniper rifle was thrown into her arms. Her expression froze. Take it first. I guess we'll still have to rely on you to snipe today. Feng Ling didn't know what plan they had to encircle and annihilate that group of people, and Kay didn't explain it clearly. He only told her to keep the gun by her side and then turned to arrange other brothers. After Kay left with a team of people, Feng Ling looked at the sniper rifle in her arms. Although it had been so long, it didn't seem strange at all. She slowly clenched the handle of the gun and turned to look at the empty hospital corridor. When Enchanting came to look for Feng Ling, she had yet to return to the hotel. She had been waiting in the hospital. Seeing the sniper rifle in her hand, Enchanting did not say anything and let her get into the car. After that, he drove her to the highest hotel in downtown Los Angeles, chose a room on the top floor, and took her there. In the elevator, Enchanting briefly summarized the whole plan today. Kay followed Mr. Mo to encircle those people, but there were too many of them, and Jinwan couldn't stand any trouble now, so they had to finish the battle quickly. It was not impossible to fight head-on, but it would definitely hurt Jinwan, so there must be a sniper with excellent sniping ability to shoot from behind. At present, the only sniper that those people knew was Kay. They didn't know that Feng Ling was here, nor did they know the relationship between Feng Ling and 11 Base. Based on the current situation, Feng Ling was the most suitable person to shoot from behind. Feng Ling was silent for a moment and then said, I haven't held a gun for a long time. Maybe I can't hold it well. What if I accidentally hurt you? At this time, I'm afraid you can't refuse. Mr. Mo's future and Jinwan's life are now in your hands. Enchanting looked at her. In Jinwan's current situation, one more second and she will die at any time. Feng Ling immediately looked up at the slowly rising number in the elevator and said calmly, Okay, I understand. When she reached the top floor, she entered the room that Enchanting had arranged for her. When she checked the distance from the opposite building by the window, Feng Ling saw that the group of people had forced Jinwan to retreat to the balcony. Seeing that those people were surrounded by the brothers of 11 Base, Feng Ling didn't say anything more and decisively set up a sniper rifle in front of the window. Although she was no longer wearing the uniform of 11 Base, and although she was no longer the short-haired capable sniper Feng Ling, at this moment, her movements were still as skilled as many years ago, and she didn't waste a single second. After making all the preparations, she aimed the gun at the back of the head of the person who restrained Jinwan. Bang! It was a clean shot. At a distance of 500 meters from the opposite building, it hit the enemy's head. With one shot, the enemy was already bleeding on the spot. Seeing Mo Jingshan rush forward to take Jinwan into his arms in an instant, Feng Ling withdrew the sniper rifle from the window and was about to carry the gun behind her back out of habit, but then she realized that she was no longer a member of 11 Base and it was not convenient for her to take this thing with her, so she put the gun aside and looked back expressionlessly, only to see Enchanting who happened to be looking at her calmly. You haven't touched a gun for a long time, right? Enchanting asked. I haven't touched a gun since I left the base, so I'm really out of practice. If it weren't for the fact that the person I'm saving today is Jinwan, I wouldn't have taken this risk so easily. If I didn't aim accurately, I would have killed more than just her. Since Nanheng asked you to come, of course he trusts your marksmanship. Feng Ling's expression froze and she looked at him coldly. Li Nanheng asked you to find me. Otherwise, why do you think I dare to ask you to come? Since he's not too busy and he's still in Los Angeles, why doesn't he come in person? Speaking of marksmanship, Kay and I were also taught by him. Isn't he the safest sniper? Guessing that she had fallen into Li Nanheng's trap, Feng Ling's expression was somewhat unkind. What do you think? Enchanting smiled lightly. There was nothing to say. If she didn't leave now, Li Nanheng would probably come up to her. She quickly put the gun away and walked out expressionlessly. Ching Ching's baby has been sick with a fever for several days. Recently, Ching Ching has been a little anxious and may make some mistakes. Please forgive me. W. 4M. Chapter 1309. Qin Siding didn't know much about her and Li Nanheng, but these days in the hospital, he heard a lot. Feng Ling, Nanheng forced you to leave the base for your own good. You grew up in an orphanage and finally found your family, so you should go back to live a peaceful life. Besides, your family won't allow you to live such a life of life and death, Qin Siding said. Qin Siding said, back then, he didn't marry Feng Mingzhu but chose to marry Li Nanheng Cenotaph. This matter almost caused the relationship between the Feng and Li families to collapse. They only maintained peace on the surface. After all, it was the Li family who broke the promise first. The Feng family reluctantly accepted the matter of him marrying Li Nanheng Cenotaph. This is equivalent to Li Nanheng owing the Feng family a big favor. In the end, it was the lost child of the Feng family. He couldn't negotiate with the Feng family at that time, especially when his father was on his last breath. He asked him to send him back and ask him to leave the dangerous place of 11 base. Even if it was just for the good of him, he had to do it. Feng Ling didn't seem to hear his words. She didn't stop and walked out without looking back. However, as soon as she walked out of the door, she saw a tall and straight figure standing outside. The man was just outside the door, his back leaning against the wall, a cigarette in his hand flickering between his fingers. Because she came out, he glanced sideways at her. The man narrowed his dark eyes in the smoke and stared at her cold face. Then he took a deep breath of the cigarette and blew the smoke onto her face. Feng Ling looked coldly at Li Nanheng, who had been waiting outside the door for a long time. Sure enough, it was he who ordered people to arrange this encirclement and suppression operation after the incident, and it was he who asked her to be the sniper. The people who failed to stop her in the hospital used this method to force her to appear and wait for him to catch her here. The two of them looked at each other and Li Nanheng smiled. I haven't touched a gun for so long. Are you satisfied today? Do you want to shoot me again, and? Even though he leaned back against the wall casually, he was still much taller than her. When he looked down at her, he could clearly see every one of her eyelashes. At this time, because she saw him, she seemed to be frozen bit by bit, without any warmth. Even though she had been separated for 10 months and her appearance had been crowned with the shell of the eldest daughter of the Feng family, she was still the former Feng Ling, quiet and cold. Sure enough, if 10 months ago, Feng Ling, who had just returned from England, could still find a trace of her former self, but now, she, who had struggled in the New York business world for nearly a year, had finally erased all the shadows of the past. Except that she was still her entire temperament had changed. She was no longer the short-haired young man. Instead, apart from the sense of indifference and distance, there was also a hint of a woman's aura, the aura of a woman who mingled in the workplace. 10 months ago, she thought he was asleep, and the night she left. Feng family, Feng and Feng family. Then, she really did it. His heart skipped a beat and ached a little. Li Nanheng threw away the cigarette butt in his hand and stepped on it to extinguish it. He was about to reach out to hold her wrist, but she avoided him without leaving a trace. At the same time, she retreated a meter away. Li Nanheng lowered his eyes to look at her. He was the one who personally sent her away and gave her enough time to grow up. She refused to let him help her. Even in the past 10 months in New York, when she encountered several business crises, he wanted to use the Li Corporation's name to finance and support her, but every time, he was rejected by her. All the financing documents were returned. She did not sign a single word, nor did she agree to it. Her appearance and temperament had changed, but her stubbornness remained the same. He asked in a low and hoarse voice, "Are you going to keep avoiding me?" As though not hearing him, Feng Ling turned around and gave up on taking the elevator. As the elevator was about to pass by him, she turned and walked toward the safe passage in another direction. Li Nanheng's expression faltered and he walked over. Walking into the safe passage, Feng Ling had already walked down the stairs quickly. She was one floor away from him. She stopped at the turn of the stairs and suddenly raised her head to look at Li Nanheng. The two of them looked at each other across the dozens of stairs. Li Nanheng only lowered his eyes to look at her indifferently and did not say anything. After a moment of silence, Feng Ling said, "Li Nanheng, do you remember what the first thing I did when I first arrived at 11 base?" The man gently placed one hand on the railing of the stairs. "What?" "Spar." Feng Ling stared into his eyes. "I said that if I want to stay in 11 base, you have to see my ability. You asked me to spar with you." Li Nanheng looked at her without batting an eyelid. "So?" Feng Ling curved her lips slightly, but her smile did not reach her eyes. "Although I've left 11 base, I've only changed from one battlefield to another. It's been more than 2 years since I returned to the Feng family. I don't dare to say that I'm a business genius. I'm just working hard in the Feng family, but at least, I have a place in the business world. For this, perhaps I should really thank my ruthlessness and decisiveness. Otherwise, I wouldn't have become like this." Hearing the meaning behind her words, Li Nanheng did not respond to her mocking tone. He just stood there and looked at her. "Since I've changed battlefields, I should still maintain the rules and habits. After all, my wolfish nature and temper were all polished in 11 base. Even if I leave, some habits are still deeply rooted in me." Feng Ling's pink lips moved slightly. "For example, when I don't like someone, I also want to spar with him." Li Nanheng raised his brows coldly. Feng Ling still looked at him and raised her beautiful eyes slightly. "Li Nanheng, in this new battlefield, do you want to spar with me?" Li Nanheng curved his lips and casually placed one arm on the railing of the stairwell. He looked down at the woman who was looking up at him and seemed to have accepted her invitation to play. "And what do you want to spar with?" A month later, at the Washington Financial Conference, whoever gets $1 billion of financing first will win. Feng Ling's eyes were bright. Li Nanheng smiled again and his dark gaze fell into her eyes. "What are the chips? What's the price for winning or losing?" Chapter 13:10. Feng Ling looked at him. "You said that you loved me for 10 years. I broke up with you because I said so. You didn't agree. I've thought about it. No matter what age I am, my experience seems to be inseparable from you. I'm destined to be entangled with you for the rest of my life." She paused for 2 seconds before continuing calmly, "I'm no longer a teenage girl. I'm about to be 24 years old, which is the right age for marriage. As for you, I either completely break up with you and let go of the knot in my heart to fall in love with other men who pursue me, or I'll be entangled with you for the rest of my life. There's no need for us to waste time on each other." "So?" Li Nanheng's brows moved slightly. "The Washington Financial Conference will raise 1 billion yuan. Within a week, whoever gets it first will win." Feng Ling raised her chin and looked at him indifferently. "If you win, I'll marry you. If I win, don't show up again. Let's end things between us." Li Nanheng smiled. "That's it." Hearing his tone, Feng Ling looked at him coldly. "Don't be so early. I have additional conditions." "Speak." "You can't let the arms dealers behind you participate in next month's financial conference, nor are you allowed to take out your private funds to participate in the financing. I know you have money, and the Lee Corporation doesn't need financing, but the way we compete now is whoever wins the 1 billion yuan outside will win. This game must be based on equal rules. Feng Ling looked at him coldly. If you dare to cheat, I'll dare to find another man to marry. Li Nanheng clasped his hands on the railing and looked down at her. When he heard that she wanted to find another man to marry, he smiled faintly. I'm afraid that man thinks his life is too long. Feng Ling retracted her gaze and no longer looked at him. She looked straight at the floor sign at the corner of the stairs. I'm going to see Jean Wan. With that, she walked down. Listening to Feng Ling's footsteps in the stairwell below, Li Nanheng withdrew his gaze from the stairwell, picked up his phone, played with it in his hand for a moment, and turned to walk out. As he walked, he dialed a number on his phone. After the other party picked up, he said mildly, check all the investors and S-level financiers at the Washington Financial Conference next month. See who they are. After you find out, bring my words to them. If the phone corporation in New York comes to them to study the financing plan, open the door and let her in. Don't make things difficult for her. After giving a few simple instructions, Li Nanheng hung up the phone and turned back to see Qin Siding leaning against the door with his arms crossed and looking at him with clear and meaningful eyes. Li Nanheng threw the phone back into his pocket and walked over. The enemy has collapsed. Of course. Qin Siding smiled and glanced at him. I just went to the safety passage and heard a few words. Li Nanheng remained silent. You clearly know that this is the bottom line that she has set for herself. Either she stays with you, or she breaks up completely. Although it is indeed in line with her personality, you only have a 50% chance of winning after taking into account her additional conditions. If you lose, I'm afraid that she will never turn back. But you, on the other hand, not only did you not make things difficult for her, you even asked the financiers to open the door for her. What, are you trying to personally send her away? Li Nanheng put one hand in his trouser pocket and asked instead of answering, if Shi Nianj were to play this kind of game with you, would you choose to let her enjoy the pleasure of revenge in this game and let her vent and be happy, or would you choose to fight her head on and let her taste the taste of failure? Qin Siding raised his brows. You've seen through her. Li Nanheng sneered. It's not like I've done anything unforgivable. If she's angry, I'll help her vent her anger. If she's unhappy, I'll let her take revenge until she's happy. The first 13 years of her life were all messy and blank. In the last 11 years, I was there. No one in this world knows her better than me. Qin Siding snorted. Look at your smug expression. It's as though what she said earlier wasn't a sparring game, but a promise to marry you and become Mrs. Li. Li Nanheng smiled. The moment she spoke, she was all ready. You're very confident, it's not confidence. It's the truth. The cenotaph was just a name. It has nothing to do with the truth. Besides, she's still alive, so the cenotaph is useless. You should know this. Of course. Li Nanheng glanced at him from the corner of his eye, as though his brother had accidentally seen his treasure. Just now, did you see her marksmanship? Aha, Qin Siding replied casually. How is it? Is it outstanding? Handsome? Is it beautiful? Are you envious? Compared to your Shi Nianj, isn't Feng Ling more beautiful? Qin Siding couldn't take it anymore. He couldn't stand this Li Nanheng who had been ignored for more than 2 years and was so excited just because he had just accepted a sparring game. He turned around and left. Jean Wan had really experienced a catastrophe. Feng Ling stayed in Los Angeles for a few days. After Jean Wan was out of danger and was brought back to High City by Mr. Mo, she left Los Angeles. After returning to New York, she began to prepare for the financial conference a month later. In fact, this was the first time she had attended such a grand financial conference. Fifth Avenue in Washington was the largest financial center in the world, but Fong Ling had never been there before. Instead, she went to the edge of the city to carry out missions, eliminate various terrorists, and participate in many life-and-death rescues. The plane landed smoothly at Washington Airport. After leaving the airport, she took a bus to the city. Fong Ling sat in the back of the car and closed her eyes to rest. After driving for more than an hour, they arrived at the exit of the airport highway. There was a little traffic jam. She opened her eyes from the back and looked at the other cars that were also stuck here. She looked at the peaceful world through the window. Every day, she had to struggle in the bloodbath of the business world. Instead of her hands and feet, she had to move her heart and brain. This kind of life seemed peaceful and without danger, but it was actually very tiring. At least she didn't have to rush to take a helicopter when she was in a hurry, and she didn't have to rush to save people before she could even tuck her clothes in before she had to rush to rescue people. This kind of stability made Fong Ling feel that the past 10 years were just a dream every time she opened her eyes. She didn't know when she was real and when she was fake. Chapter 13:11. Because the financial conference was about to begin next month, Fong Ling had to move many things to Washington this month. The focus of many business cooperation projects would also be shifted here. The reason why she was so busy in the Fong Corporation was because there were still many problems left behind in the Fong Corporation that had not been resolved. For example, when her father, Fong Yuanqing, was still alive, because he didn't have a son and Fong Mingzhu wasn't anything great, he spent many years to nurture a young man named Fong Mingyi. It was said that this Fong Mingyi's family background was ordinary when he was young and he relied on his own abilities to make a name for himself. Later, he coincidentally met Fong Yuanqing and worked under him. Step by step, he spent nearly 10 years to become the general manager of the company. Later, this Fong Mingyi acknowledged Fong Yuanqing as his godfather. Everyone in the Fong family thought that this person would definitely take over half of the Fong Corporation in the future. However, although Fong Yuanqing recognized this godson and nurtured this talent, he did not completely intend to transfer everything under his name to an outsider. Even if this person was now surnamed Fong, this was only a way out for the Fong family. He would only choose this method if he had no other choice. At that time, he actually hoped that Fong Mingzhu would become someone great, but in the end, he was still disappointed. Fong Mingyi was very good at observing people's expressions. His foundation in the Fong Corporation had been stable for many years. When he gradually realized that Fong Yuanqing only treated him as a spare tire, he was unwilling and gradually had ulterior motives. Fong Yuanqing sensed it and directly sent him to a subsidiary to manage matters. After 3 to 4 years, this subsidiary had already been separated from the company by Fong Mingyi and became a company under his own name. It no longer had anything to do with the Fong Corporation. Furthermore, this subsidiary was growing larger and larger. Right now, the headquarters of this company was in Washington. It was called the T Organization. It was a financial institution related to the financial chain and had dealings with many large financial companies on Fifth Avenue. Fong Yuanqing had seen that Fong Mingyi had a good head for business back then. In the end, he had tacitly agreed to let Fong Mingyi separate himself from the company. He only hoped that he would be able to live in peace in the future. At least he would have a godson that he was not familiar with. However, Fong Yuanqing also knew that Fong Mingyi was unwilling to give up. The Fong family, this piece of fat meat that was about to be in his mouth, was actually taken away in the end. The news of the return of the second daughter of the Fong family was what made Fong Mingyi the most unhappy. The Fong family's last hope had been shattered. Why did this second miss suddenly appear? Originally, he wanted to watch the Fong family gradually decline in the hands of this second miss so that he could clean up the battle. However, he didn't expect that this young woman named Feng Ling actually had some tricks up her sleeve. In addition, she had a very professional Qin Shuk by her side. Even if the Feng family didn't prosper, they could at least maintain their former glory. It was still stable. He had just taken over and it was already so stable. If he let this Feng Ling continue to live peacefully like this, if she really made some achievements in the future, he would really lose this fat piece of meat. After learning that Feng Ling would be attending this financial conference, Feng Mingyi checked her information and the various financial businessmen she might contact after arriving here. He sneered and picked up the phone. His cold voice was transmitted over. Inform all the financial partners related to T Corporation. From now on, no one is allowed to accept the Feng Corporation's orders. If you find any clients related to the Feng Corporation, snatch them for me at all costs. It doesn't matter how much money you spend. In short, don't let her stand in this financial conference. She can't get a single cent. Yes, I'm going to cut off the Feng Corporation's path. You should know what to do. After saying this, Feng Mingyi hung up the phone without hesitation. Qin Shuk had just followed Feng Ling to Washington. When she heard the news about the T Corporation, her expression was extremely ugly. It was obvious that they wanted to kill the Feng family at this financial conference. They wanted to break Feng Ling's arm before her wings had fully grown. Furthermore, they didn't hide anything at all. Their goal was so obvious. Back then, Chairman Feng shouldn't have been too kind to that godson. After Qin Shuk told Feng Ling about this, she sat by the side and complained. Feng Ling didn't say anything. She didn't know much about Feng Mingyi. She only learned about it when she investigated the personnel changes and the various companies after returning to take over the Feng Corporation. However, at that time, she was busy with other more important matters and didn't consider whether this person's existence would affect the company. Now it seemed that her father had really let the tiger return to the mountain. He was in such a hurry to force her to return to the Feng family. On his last breath, he had to think of a way to find someone who could help her decide and choose the path to return to the Feng family for her. In fact, what she was really worried about was that if the Feng family lost its leader and the two old men couldn't defeat Feng Mingyi, the Feng family would really lose everything in the end. Does this person want to kill the Feng Corporation? Feng Ling asked. Qin Shuk hesitated for a moment. He does have such a purpose, but I don't think he has the ability. Although the T Corporation has been in Washington for several years, it is still just an organization. It can't even be considered a formal company. No matter how good his interpersonal relationships here are, the Feng family can still suppress him. As long as we don't lose, he might not be able to defeat us. When Feng Ling learned of this, she appeared very calm. After discussing some plans with Qin Shuk, Feng Ling stood quietly in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down from the tall floor. Her tall figure was reflected in the glass. She held her phone, her gaze calm. The weather in Washington was very good. The sunlight shone on her through the window, but Feng Ling felt a chill run down her spine. Not only did the people from the T Corporation say that they wanted to block Feng Ling's path, but they also wanted to block all the partners who were about to cooperate with the Feng Corporation. He was so arrogant because he thought that Feng Ling was just a little girl who had been lost outside for many years. She had just returned and had to take on this heavy responsibility. She didn't have any ability at all. If she couldn't get out of the embarrassing situation, she would at most be a little girl who cried in front of the board of directors. She definitely didn't have any extraordinary ability. In the afternoon, Qin Shuk called again from outside. The current situation is like this. These people who are working together in the finance industry don't seem to have any intention of targeting you. Moreover, they seem to admire you. Although I don't know how you became famous in Washington, they don't seem to have any prejudice against you. However, because of what happened on T-Mobile, they don't seem to be on either side. They're just waiting and watching. It's much better than what we expected. Chapter 13:12. All right, I understand. I'll be prepared. Feng Ling's voice was patient and gentle on the phone. Qin Shuk, who already knew her very well, knew that she needed a moment of peace behind her strong indifference. After hanging up the phone, Feng Ling remained standing in the same spot. The large office was empty, and it seemed that only her own breathing could be heard. Then her two phones kept ringing, announcing the official start of the tug-of-war between Feng Mingyi and her. Feng Ling turned slightly, and her long eyelashes fluttered with her movements. Then she expressionlessly picked up the phone that kept ringing. CEO Feng, the relevant personnel in charge of the financial investment department are all clamoring to see you. The assistant's voice came from the other end of the phone, accompanied by noisy chatter. Feng Ling's eyes were cold. Let them in. In less than 5 minutes, more than a dozen heads of the relevant departments walked into the office. They looked at each other, but they didn't know who to speak first. The financing in Washington is probably difficult. Furthermore, some of the deals have been refunded. The Feng Corporation stock has begun to fall. Our old partners are also under pressure from TMing. They called us to inform us that the contract will not be renewed after the end of the contract. A supervisor frowned and said, CEO Feng, you've only taken over the company for less than a year, and now you've encountered such a big obstacle on your first time attending the financial conference. Do you have any good plans? You can't let so many of us stay here to drink the northwest wind. Right now, it's only TMing's words. As for those partners, they are indeed the ones that the Feng Corporation doesn't plan to continue working with. We haven't even obtained the important financing that can be used. Are these bits and pieces of pressure enough to make us lose control? Feng Ling said coldly. The supervisors, who originally thought that she was in a mess because of this situation, saw that she didn't seem to panic at all. From the moment they heard the news until now, she had been slowly putting pressure on them. Everyone thought that Feng Ling wouldn't have any ideas, but from the looks of it, although TMing's matter would snowball, this snowball clearly wasn't much of a threat to Feng Ling. It wasn't the first day he had followed her. From her expression, he could tell that she was calm. But now those old customers are hinting at us, hinting that we might, I know. Don't worry about it. Carry out all the work you've arranged in Washington. Don't be affected. I know what I'm doing. You can all go out. Feng Ling did not say much and only threw them this sentence. CEO Feng, we've interacted with that Feng Mingyi before. He's a very cunning person. We can't fight him head-on. A supervisor hesitated for a moment before saying, besides, he has a lot of tricks up his sleeve. They might not all be open and above board. Feng Ling did not speak. She only looked at the supervisor with her pure black eyes and did not speak for a long time. A nightclub in Washington. The sky was filled with wine and women as they toasted one another. A certain financial tycoon sat on the sofa in the luxurious private room and smiled as he toasted Feng Mingyi. After putting down the wine glass, he wiped his mouth. What's the name of the current person in charge of the Feng Corporation? I remember she's the second miss that the Feng family claims to be, right? Yes. Feng Ming raised his brows, but his tone was indifferent as he said, her name is Feng Ling. When she was young, she probably suffered a lot. When she grew up, she was recognized by the Feng family, but she didn't receive any good education. CEO, don't take her too seriously. In the business world, this kind of little girl with little experience is not worth mentioning. She's not a threat at all. She can be easily suppressed. CEO played with his wine glass, his eyes shining. What's there to suppress a little girl in her 20s? I'm more interested in her as a person. Feng Ming raised his brows. Oh. CEOE, have you taken a fancy to her? A few months ago, when I went to New York to work, I happened to meet her once. She probably didn't notice me, but I think she's a cold-faced beauty. CEOE narrowed his eyes. At that time, a few security guards bullied her assistant. I turned around and saw her beat up those security guards. I've never seen that expression on a woman before. Feng Ming snorted and smiled. I've checked her past. She seems to have stayed in a military base for a few years. She does have some skills. I've been in the business circle for so many years, but I've never seen such a woman before. I really want to taste her. CEOE rubbed his chin as he spoke. At the same time, he smiled maliciously and raised his glass to Feng Ming. However, I don't know who has been putting a lot of pressure on Washington recently. It seems like she has someone backing her. I'm not too sure about the details. In short, it won't be easy to target her. Mingy, if you want me to help you hold down this little bit of money, you should at least give me a taste of it, right? What is the sweetness that CEOE is referring to? Feng Ming had an unfathomable smile on his face. CEOE also smiled. I heard that in this circle, Mingy is famous for never giving gifts. If he wants to give gifts, he will only give beauties. As long as a partner takes a fancy to a woman, he will try his best to send her to the other party's bed. Look at this second miss of the Feng family, that's really making things difficult for me. Feng Ming raised his brows. Who in the circle doesn't know that I was the godson of the Feng family? No matter what, this second miss is my godsister. I can give her to anyone, but I can't give my godsister away. Ha 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 ha, godsister, godsister. She's not related to the Feng family by blood. It's been a few years since I last contacted the Feng family. Now I want to personally pull this godsister down. Why do I care about this? CEOE smiled. I reckon that this kind of cold-faced beauty is still a virgin. After all, no one can get close to her. If you like her, you have to do it as soon as possible. Otherwise, if she stays in the business circle for a few more years, who knows how many hands she'll have. Besides, since she has a relationship with the Feng family, I can coax her no matter what. When the time comes, think of a way to send her over to me. This way and that way, make her more obedient, right? CEOE said as he gave him a few looks. Feng Ming curved his lips and played with the wine glass in his hand. It's not that there's no way. It depends on whether CEOE's sincerity is worth the risk. This time, the biggest financing channel is in my hands. It's at least 1 billion yuan, CEOE said confidently. CEOE said confidently, as long as I don't release this sum of money, her trip to Washington will be in vain. Is my 1 billion yuan sincere enough? Okay, deal. Chapter 13:13. Although Feng Ling was prepared, the obstruction this time still had a very bad impact on the Feng Corporation. In just 2 days, the Feng Corporation stock had fallen several times. All the large orders and unemployed executives in New York and the executives who had come to Washington were at a loss. Even Qin Shuk did not smile for the past 2 days. Every day, she seriously sorted out the company's financial situation. Tianming had been openly poaching people in the past 2 days, trying to poach many talents from the Feng Corporation. Feng Ling listened to the assistant's report. The assistant nervously looked at Feng Ling's side profile as he reported. Right now, everyone in the company was talking about it. They even said that this might be Feng Ming's revenge. No matter what the reason was, there was only one result from this planned and forceful suppression. It was to force the Feng Corporation into a desperate situation and wait for someone to take over. Has anyone from the company's board of directors called? Feng Ling asked after a few seconds, as though she did not feel any nervousness about the situation outside. She knew very well what the outcome would be if this battle was not fought well. That Feng Mingyi had never been willing to let go of the Feng family's big fat piece of meat. No, but... The assistant raised her head to look at her. She seemed to have something to say but did not dare to say it. Speak. Feng Ling's voice was straightforward. She was not affected by these events. When I took the elevator upstairs with the documents, I heard two executives discussing. They said that the board of directors in New York might go to the Feng family to talk to the old master and old madam. Then they want to hold a board meeting to impeach them. The assistant looked at her worriedly. This is all from what I heard. Feng Ling's expression did not change. I understand. Thank you. Originally, she thought that after hearing this, Feng Ling would be angry or terrified. However, the assistant did not expect that. Feng Ling seemed to have expected it. Her expression did not change at all, and she could not get any information from her face. However, thinking about it, it made sense. No matter what, Feng Ling was a very calm person. She did not show her emotions. The news that the new leader of the Feng Corporation was a cold-faced beauty had long been spread in the circle. It was not strange. However, this time, the matter had become so serious. Was she confident that she could survive this crisis smoothly? After all, the Feng Corporation was holding Feng Ling's phone. If they couldn't survive this time, not only would Feng Ling lose face, the Feng family would also be unable to raise their heads. After all, this was the Feng family's last hope. The remaining two old ones were no longer worth mentioning. Many people in the American Chinese business circle were waiting to see the Feng family's ending. Especially since the one targeting the Feng Corporation was the Feng family's godson. Feng Ling came to Tianming and was prepared that Feng Mingyi would not see her. But surprisingly, he actually agreed. The elevator slowly rose. This was the first time Feng Ling had come to see this man called Feng Mingyi, the godson that her father had raised for many years. This person knew the Feng Corporation and the Feng family like the back of his hand. It could be said that he knew the Feng Corporation very well, so it was easy for him to win every battle. However, he didn't know much about this Feng Mingyi. Under the secretary's lead, Feng Ling walked into Feng Mingyi's office. Feng Mingyi was a man who was pleasing to the eye. Furthermore, he was the kind of man who would make any elder feel that he was obedient and filial. This was also one of the reasons why her father had made a mistake in judging him. The young man sat behind the desk. The temperature of the air conditioner here was too low, causing one's hair to stand on end. After the secretary left, she naturally closed the door. Feng Ling walked over and sat down in front of the desk. This was the first time they met, but it was as though there was no need to greet each other politely. Mr. Feng's methods are impressive. In just 2 or 3 days, you've blocked the path of my Feng Corporation. Feng Ling's cold voice sounded. She did not panic at all. Feng Mingyi looked at this rumored cold-faced beauty. His eyes reflected Feng Ling's calm but untainted face. It was no wonder that almost everyone who had seen her in person was shocked by her cold and beautiful aura. She was indeed a completely different type of temperament from ordinary women. Everyone's surname is Feng, so there's no need to address me as Mississippi, Feng Mingyi sneered. Speaking of which, my name was given to me by my father. Seeing that you're half a sister to me, I don't want to make things difficult for you. I also know that Tianming is a branch of the Feng Corporation, and I know what I want. If it weren't for your appearance, perhaps the Feng family would already be in my pocket. Why would an outsider learn this and that to compete with me for this half of the country? I'm afraid you can't afford the half of the country that Mr. Feng has taken a fancy to. Feng Ling smiled, but the coldness on her face contrasted sharply with the smile in her eyes. I want to remind you that TMing is a branch of the Feng Corporation. The name of the legal person behind it shouldn't have been changed yet. If I want to take it back, do you believe that I can remove it from TMing at any time? Hearing this, Feng Mingyi only smiled. I thought you came here today to beg for mercy. Beg for mercy? Did you do something so extraordinary that you need me to beg for mercy? Feng Ling's voice was not as soft as an ordinary girl's. In this seemingly calm but tense environment, it added a hint of coldness. I'm afraid the person who can make me, Feng Ling, beg for mercy hasn't been born yet. Mr. Feng, don't take your little tricks too seriously. Why, do you have other tricks? Or can the Feng Corporation, which has no backer for a long time, find some backer? As far as I know, CEO, who has the highest financing channel and the highest amount of money at this financial conference, hasn't even come into contact with anyone yet. CEO and I have been friends for many years. If I don't speak, do you think he will give me a single cent? Hearing Feng Mingyi's confident attitude, Feng Ling's cold eyes turned even colder. CEO. Initially, she had received news that the person in charge of the highest financing channel was not this CEO, but it was clear that because of Feng Mingyi's tricks, the person in charge had changed. Yes, I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint Miss Feng. Feng Ming raised his brows and looked at her. Something happened to the previous person in charge recently and he fell. The person who came up was changed. He has interacted with the previous person, but CEO has never interacted with him. Do you think you have any chance of winning? Chapter 13-14. What makes Miss Feng even more disappointed is that I, Feng Mingyi, have never been an unyielding person. All the assets and family business under my name should have been mine. Feng Mingyi spoke very straightforwardly and did not take Feng Ling seriously at all. He was too lazy to even lie. If you're just greedy for the position of CEO, I can allow you to continue sitting here, but other than that, don't even think about getting anything else. Otherwise, Feng Ling looked at him without any fear in her pure black eyes, as though she had seen through his thoughts. Seeing that she did not show any signs of softening her attitude, Feng Mingyi narrowed his eyes. He did not say anything, but he looked at her meaningfully. Mr. Feng, I'm afraid you've misunderstood my purpose today. Oh. Then why are you here today? Could it be that you're just here to see me, your godbrother? I just want to invite Mr. Feng to bed with me today. Feng Ling smiled. This was the perfect counterattack to Feng Mingyi's arrogant attitude. Bet? What are you betting with me? The chips in your hands don't seem to be stable, and I can easily snatch them away. Bet? Do you have the capital? Feng Mingyi leaned back against the leather chair. In short, I can't play any tricks. Are you afraid, Mr. Feng? Seeing her attitude, Feng Mingyi's challenge factor was aroused. He narrowed his eyes and looked at her with interest. In this business circle where everyone had ulterior motives, it was rare to see someone with such clean eyes, and she was a woman. Putting aside his past with the Feng family, just by looking at her, he really wanted to dirty the pure things in her eyes. How did such a person survive in the business world? Let's bet that I'll definitely survive this time. How about it? Feng Ling's voice was as cold as clear water. Although she did not miss any of Feng Mingyi's expressions, she did not have any extra reaction. Feng Mingyi looked at her, his eyes filled with emotions. In fact, he really wanted to gamble with her openly, but just as CEO had said, he didn't know who was backing her up from the beginning. Now, he could only obtain a small chance of winning from CEO. If he wanted to play another game, he could no longer stop himself. Besides, Boss E was still waiting for her to come personally. What if I win? Feng Ming asked. I don't like ifs. If I really win, I'll hand over the power of the Feng Corporation with both hands and never regret it. On the other hand, if I win, I'll return TMing to the Feng Corporation. The word Feng in my name will be completely removed. I'll never have anything to do with the Feng family again. Right now, Feng Ling was talking business, and she could also speak in the way of a businessman. Ha! Feng Mingyi sneered. As expected of someone who grew up in the military base. The way you speak is like this. You don't even leave any leeway for yourself. Then I'll wait to hand over the power of the Feng Corporation. Feng Ling smiled lightly. Really? Since both sides believe that they won't lose, then let's write a contract so that we won't regret it later. As she spoke, she stood up and placed a printed document in front of him. The contents of the bet were all on it. You've already planned this. Feng Mingyi looked at the words on it and then at the calm Feng Ling. For a moment, he suddenly wondered if he had miscalculated because she was really too calm and prepared. If possible, I hope to erase the surname Feng as soon as possible and get out of TMing. Feng Ling glanced at him coldly. After he signed, she picked up the bet and turned to leave. After returning to the branch office in Washington with Feng Mingyi's signature, Feng Ling entered the office and contacted several people in charge of Fifth Avenue. After finding out about CEO E, she learned that CEO E would hold a banquet with many partners here tomorrow. Tomorrow night, the venue would be a villa in the middle of a mountain in Washington. The Feng Corporation was also invited. Logically speaking, the Feng Corporation had never cooperated with this well-known financial company in Washington. This time, it was because the person in charge was an old acquaintance of her father that she managed to contact him. In the end, the other party had changed. She had never even heard of this CEO E, so there was no friendship between them. Looking at the invitation list, most of them were companies that were very prosperous in the American Chinese community. Although the Feng Corporation was not small, it seemed a little far-fetched to squeeze into this list. Besides, she had never seen the CEO E before. Why was she invited? Why did Feng Mingyi repeatedly mention that only this CEO E could help her? Was there any connection? Are you sure you want to attend this banquet tonight? Qin Shuk stared at the invitation for a long time. Am I the only one who thinks there's a trap? With that, she looked at the people around her. They were all Feng Ling's secretaries and assistants. Hearing her words, they said almost at the same time, it's not just one person. After speaking, they all turned to look at Feng Ling. Feng Ling was signing a document. She held the pen quietly in her hand. After signing her name, she looked up at them. I know it's a trap. Then why are you still going? Feng Ling pushed the signed document forward and said lightly, I know what I'm doing. Don't worry. If anything happens, I won't be the one to suffer. Qin shook. But we're in the business world now. It's no longer the circle where we fight and kill each other. Those people rely on force. If someone takes a fancy to them and drugs them, what else can we do? Feng Ling raised her brows. That reminds me. So? Qin Shuk looked at her. You think it's possible? Yes. Feng Ling said lightly, I have to go even if I do. Qin Shuk could see that he had made up his mind. She gritted her teeth in anger. Are you crazy? You know that they have ill intentions towards you. If something really happens, you won't even have a chance of protecting yourself. It's too late to run to a deserted place like the mountain villa. Even the police can't catch up. After speaking, she saw that Feng Ling did not say much, nor did she explain anything. Qin Shuk picked up her phone and quietly flipped through the address book as she walked out. When she found the name, she walked to the door and was about to make a call. "Shuk, who are you calling?" Feng Ling's voice suddenly came from behind. I rushed to the hospital at 2 in the morning. Qing Qing's baby turned from a viral cold to influenza B. He had a high fever of 39.6 degrees and was in a terrible state. Chapter 13:15. Qin Shuk paused. Before the call went through, Feng Ling had already stood up and walked over. She lowered her head and saw Li Nanheng's name on her phone. Seeing that she had been caught, Qin Shuk could only mutter awkwardly, "The police can't rush over, but at least Li Nanheng can." Feng Ling pulled her phone out of the address book and threw it back into her pocket. "You're not allowed to call him. Why did you inform him about me? I'm doing this for your own good. I'm afraid something might happen. If there's really a problem, even I can't handle it myself. It'll be too late to call anyone." Feng Ling gently patted Qin Shuk's pocket and looked at her deeply for a while. Qin Shuk was speechless for a moment. She could only nod. "All right, I understand. I won't mess around. I trust you. I know that not many people can beat you, but you still have to be careful." Feng Ling responded and returned to her desk to work, as though there was no banquet to attend tonight. It was as though nothing had happened earlier. Before going to CEO Yi's villa, Feng Ling left a message for Qin Shuk. If she called her at 8 p.m. but couldn't get through, she could call the police. After that, she drove to the villa on the mountain. It couldn't be said to be deserted. At least, it was a very prosperous, wealthy area in Washington. Many rich people here were used to living on the mountain. They enjoyed a luxurious life while breathing clean air in a good environment. Mid-mountain villas were the norm for rich people. There were many villas of this type nearby, and the parking lot at the foot of the mountain was also luxurious and large. Looking at the cars that had just parked in, it could be seen that the people who were invited here today were either rich or noble, and not ordinary people. Feng Ling sat in the car for a while and sent her phone's GPS location to the company's computer. Today, she was not wearing the suit she usually wore in the company. Instead, she was wearing a white and blue shirt that was a combination of casual and sports style. It was very comfortable and she was wearing a pair of white flats. The biggest advantage of this dress was that she could hide things. For example, she could put some small and precise daggers or blades in her sleeves and pockets, and she could also hang some things around her waist. After preparing everything, Feng Ling got out of the car and walked up. At the same time, Los Angeles, the Li family. It was rare that the 4 elders of the Li family had been in good health recently. No one had to lie down and sit to recuperate. It had been more than a year since they had gathered to play mahjong together. Today, they finally got together, so the game was set up. The 3rd son of the Li family said as he touched the cards, "I heard that Nanheng has been frequently appearing in New York recently. These few days, he seems to have contacted Washington. Why? Is the Li Corporation going to expand there?" The 2nd son of the Li family smiled. "Expand my ass. What else can he do in New York? Aren't you going to chase after your wife?" Lao San raised his eyebrows. "Oh, I had a stroke a while ago and was hospitalized. I was muddle-headed for a few months and almost forgot that Nanheng hasn't gotten his wife yet." "Why? It's been so long, and there's still no news." Then, 2nd brother, 3rd brother, and 4th brother looked at Li Junyan. Li Junyan expressionlessly played a card. Let him chase after his own wife. Why should we old men worry about it? Lao Si said with a smile, "I don't think we should ask him to change the target. He's been fighting with that Feng Ling for so many years, but but there haven't been any sparks. Perhaps it's just fate. Li Junyan snorted. I want him to change his target, but does that brat look like he'll listen to me? That girl Feng Ling is good and a proper lady of the Feng family, but her temper is really like an iceberg. Even if she really marries into the Li family in the future, I don't know if she will have a good attitude to show her filial piety. Lao Si then clicked his tongue. Touch. Hey, don't snatch it. Mine, I'll touch it. That's not necessarily the case. It's not the first time I've seen that girl. Li Junyan touched the cards and said, she's a good child, but her childhood experiences have made her habitually wary of others. I've also asked a few members of 11 Base who often come into contact with her. In fact, she's a very careful and caring girl, but she's always a little introverted. Instead of letting a granddaughter-in-law who whispers sweet nothings to me all day long show up in front of me, and not letting this kind of child who will say what she has to say and stay by herself come over, I'll be able to live more peacefully in the future. It seems like you've already made up your mind about this granddaughter-in-law. Second elderly smiled and said, then it seems that Nanheng has to work harder. Otherwise, when will I be able to hold my great-grandson? I was wondering why Nanheng was suddenly so obedient and willing to return to the Li Corporation. It was all because he made a bet with me that if I couldn't hold a great-grandson within a year, he would obediently scram out of the base and go to the Li Corporation to manage the company for me. In the end, don't talk about a year, this brat hasn't let me hold a great-grandson for 2 years. Seriously, since he was young, he could do anything. Why did he fall for such a difficult wife? My hair is already white. How many years can I wait? I'm already half a foot in the ground. If he really insists on marrying that girl Feng Ling, why don't the few of us help him? Third elderly said with bright eyes. Fourth elderly sneered. Come on, it's not convenient for us to interfere in the matters of young people. It's normal for young people to quarrel. Besides, with Nanheng's temper, only Feng Ling can suppress him. It's rare to find someone who can control him. Let him suffer there. Nanheng has gone to Washington now. Yes, he went to Washington to chase after his wife again. Tisk tsk, I think Feng Ling is his fate. Ever since he was young, his temper has been accumulated. He's just waiting to be subdued by that girl in the future. Ha 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 ha, I think Feng Ling is in America now. It's better than when she was in England. At least she can see him. My premonition has always been accurate. I think Feng Ling will hear good news soon. That's right. Where did you get the premonition from? TSK, a place like Washington is not suitable for talking about work. It's suitable for talking about love. I really hope that these two children will be less busy with work and focus on their relationship first. Don't be busy all day. When can they have a child like this? Sigh, I'll have to wait. No, I guess it will be soon. Chapter 13-16. Mid-Mountain Villa. The space here was very large, and it was indeed suitable for a gathering. Feng Ling had yet to recognize all the people here. After all, there were too many people and it was too big. She only went in to chat with a few familiar people for a while before she was squeezed to the side by all the celebrities in Washington's Vanity Fair. When she stood not far away and picked up a glass of wine, she turned back to see an unfamiliar man in his 40s approaching. Yes, Miss Feng. Feng Ling turned back to glance at the man. Before she could speak, the secretary who walked over with him introduced, this is CEO E, the host of the banquet in the mountain villa. So you're CEO E, Feng Ling nodded at him calmly. All right, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. CEOE politely reached out his hand to Fong Ling. Fong Ling also reached out to shake his hand. Just as she was about to pull it back, she realized that the man had tightened his grip. This was not too obvious, but it was a very obvious hint between the two of them. A man was interested in a woman and wanted to continue communicating. How could Fong Ling, who had been in this circle for more than a year, not understand this hint? She only smiled politely at him and pulled her hand back without a trace. She then clinked glasses with him. The person in charge of your company was another person in charge. Today is the first time I've met CEOE. In the future, I'll have to rely on your care for business cooperation. Come, let me toast you. The cup was filled with red wine that only exceeded the bottom of the cup. Fong Ling's alcohol tolerance was not good, so she never drank much after entering this circle. She only drank as much as she could. Miss Fong, you're too polite. Our company and the Fong Corporation are partners who often work together in the American-Chinese business world. If there's anything you need, Miss Fong, you can speak to me at any time. After exchanging a few pleasantries, Fong Ling changed the topic. First, she thanked CEOE for his kind invitation. Then, she led the topic to the target of financing at the end of the month and the various directions their company wanted to talk about. She did not exchange too many pleasantries and unnecessary affection. Although she had just entered the business world, she was cautious and quiet. CEOE smiled at her from time to time. At this moment, someone else came over to greet him. He nodded apologetically at Fong Ling and turned to continue chatting with others. She then glanced at the red wine glass tower in front of her. After confirming that everyone had gotten the wine there and that there was no problem after drinking it, she picked up another glass and held it in her hand in case someone came over to give her a glass of wine. If someone came over to give her a glass of wine, she wouldn't even be able to refuse if they came over to give her a glass of wine. At this moment, her phone vibrated in her pocket. Fong Ling took it out and saw that it was from Qin Shuk. Is everything okay? It was 7:30 in the evening. There was still half an hour before 8 o'clock, but Qin Shuk was too worried to sit still. Fong Ling smiled and made a call. After reporting that she was safe, she said that everything would go according to plan. After all, tonight wouldn't be so simple. However, she didn't know much about these methods. She didn't know if she was overthinking or if something would really happen. In short, it was better to be careful. After hanging up the phone, she suddenly heard a commotion at the door. Fong Ling turned around and saw a man in his 60s walking in. Listening to the whispers of the people beside him, she realized that this was a famous big shot in the financial world of Fifth Avenue in Washington. He was the idol of many young entrepreneurs. Fong Ling wasn't familiar with him. In her eyes, her idol in the business world was her mentor, Mr. Zand. There were also two young and beautiful women beside the big boss. They seemed to be about the same age as his granddaughter. The key point was that the two women were holding his arms, one on each side. It was a scene of him hugging beauties in his arms. Fong Ling didn't plan to go over. She was about to look away when she suddenly saw a familiar tall and straight figure from the corner of her eye. Her heart skipped a beat. She focused her gaze and stood rooted to the spot as though she had been struck by lightning. The man was not as tall and handsome as he used to be when he wore the same black uniform as her. His suit was well ironed, and his figure was tall and straight. He was handsome and dignified, but there was a cold smile on his face that kept people at a distance. This kind of distant and cold attitude did not make him appear particularly arrogant. Instead, there was a kind of indifference and laziness that came after experiencing ostentatious and noisy life, making him look cold and indifferent, but especially charming. Thus, even though he deliberately chose to appear after the big shot of the financial world, he still attracted the attention of the entire audience. However, he clearly didn't like these gazes. His expression was very indifferent as he glanced around. Even when the male assistant beside him said something to him, he also turned a deaf ear. Yujing also could not understand. CEO Li had never accepted this type of dinner invitation. Why would he agree to CEO Yi's invitation at this villa in the middle of the mountain today? The moment Li Nanheng entered, Feng Ling looked away. It was Li Nanheng. Qin Shuk had been stopped by her once, so she definitely wouldn't rashly call him to inform him of this matter. In other words, Li Nanheng was one of the invited guests today. That's right. The Li Corporation's status in the Chinese world in the United States was almost on equal footing with Mr. Mo's Shine Group. In addition, with 11 base behind them, they were an existence that neither the underworld or the underworld dared to provoke. Although Li Nanheng had left the base, his reputation was still there. This time, the Li Corporation, which never participated in these small projects, had thrown out an olive branch. These people would definitely risk their lives to curry favor with him. Of course, he would not be left behind. But did he know that she was here before he came? He clearly knew what the bet she had made with him was, yet he still came here to snatch the investment from her. Did he really want to pocket the 1 billion yuan? However, at this moment, Feng Ling suddenly realized that she seemed to have made a stumbling block for herself. If that was the case, if Li Nanheng would personally appear to compete with her every time there was a competition, she would only have a 30% chance of getting the investment. After all, he should be the one the investors should curry favor with. As long as he nodded, who would dare to refuse? At that time, she had only thought about not letting the forces behind him finance him, but she had neglected the Li Corporation's status in the business world. Now, looking at Li Nanheng's appearance, she could tell that her chances of winning were very small. Chapter 13-17. By the side, there were 2 daughters brought by a CEO. They stood together and looked in the direction of the door and exclaimed, isn't that, the one from the Li Corporation?" The 2 young girls walked over there. Before Feng Ling had time to look back, she heard the 2 girls talking excitedly about the rumors about 11 base. Did all the girls like this kind of man? Li Nanheng is here too. It's really rare. The Li family rarely appears on such occasions, especially Li Nanheng. He has just taken over the Li Corporation and doesn't attend many events in person. It's really rare to see him here. Speaking of which, I've only seen CEO Li once. It was in Los Angeles last time. The Li family's strength and power can't be underestimated, especially Li Nanheng, who has always been mysterious. It seems that he has a lot of projects in his hands and has a close relationship with Shine Group. This kind of person can only be friends. Once we become enemies, we really can't take it. Then why did he suddenly come to such a small banquet? Feng Ling listened to the discussion by the side and turned to the other side expressionlessly. She went to the red wine glass tower and picked up a glass of wine. The wine in this glass was more than the wine on the long table by the side. The wine in this glass was almost half a glass. At this moment she suddenly heard someone beside Li Nanheng say, "Mr. Li is really better than hearing about it. It's rare to see you in such a place. Nice to meet you." Someone else said, "I heard that Mr. Li rarely has women by his side. Could it be that he's really abstinent to a certain extent? He even brings a male assistant to a banquet. He doesn't even bring a female secretary by his side." Abstinence. Feng Ling expressionlessly raised her glass and drank the wine in one gulp. Fortunately, not long after, the topic about Li Nanheng's abstinence was politely ended by him with a few words. Li Nanheng whispered a few words to his assistant, Yujing, and turned to chat with the celebrities who came up to him. However, at this time, the socialites who had appeared out of nowhere were all standing there, smiling and listening to their conversation. It was as though they were very happy to stand there and play the role of a vase. Clearly, they seemed very happy to play the role of a vase for Li Nanheng. Sure enough, when she was in 11 base, she was in a different state after leaving the base and entering the business circle. At the very least, there were too many women in this circle. No matter if it was a successful woman, a rich lady, or a business partner, the last thing Li Nanheng lacked was women. However, he only had a male assistant by his side, causing those vases who were attracted to him to be unsure if he was really not interested in women, or if there was something wrong with his sexual orientation. Therefore, they didn't dare to be too arrogant and could only watch from the side, silently observing and waiting for an opportunity to make a move. However, when she turned around, she could still hear a woman whispering, "I didn't expect Li Nanheng to be so handsome. I thought that a man who has been in the military base for so many years would either be big and silly or the dark-skinned and average-looking. In short, I always thought that he would be the masculine type. I didn't expect him to be so good-looking. His handsomeness is beyond my imagination. This young master of the Li clan rarely shows up before, so I've never seen him before. I didn't expect him to be so good-looking. I really want to chase after him. Look at how he brought a male assistant to a simple dinner party. It's obvious that he really doesn't keep women by his side. You want to chase after him? Can you catch up? I'm afraid even if you go, you'll hit a wall. That might not be the case. What if he just hasn't met anyone suitable?" Although Feng Ling was wary of CEO Yi's motives, at least she wasn't afraid of attending the dinner party. But now, she really regretted it. Perhaps she shouldn't have come. She decided that she had to keep a low profile today. She definitely couldn't let Li Nanheng see her. Based on this man's arrogant behavior, if he saw her here, who knew what would happen? He didn't bring a woman with him because he only had one woman in his eyes for so many years. As the only woman in his eyes, Feng Ling didn't really want to have this title. She came here today to take the opportunity to talk about the financing. If Li Nanheng was also here, not to mention that it was not good for her to speak now, even if she spoke, he could shut her up with one sentence. There was already a bet. If he went all out, she probably wouldn't be able to get a single cent of this financing. Then why was she still wasting her time here? She might as well go somewhere else to raise 1 billion yuan. Thinking of this, she put down the glass in her hand and turned to leave. In the end, she walked too fast and did not notice it. She bumped into CEO Yi, who had walked close to her at some point in time. The wine glass in CEO Yi's hand was knocked over by her and splashed onto his suit. His expression changed as he looked up at him. "Sorry." Feng Ling saw that the wine glass in CEO Yi's hand was originally very stable. He shouldn't have flipped it, but he had actually splashed it all over him. After a moment of hesitation, she corrected her expression and gave him an apologetic look. "I left in a hurry and didn't see clearly. I'm sorry." CEO Yi looked at her and smiled. It's fine, it's fine. How about this? I'll help you wipe it first." Feng Ling picked up a tissue from the table to help him wipe the wine stains on his shirt. "I'm really sorry, CEO Yi, it's okay." CEO Yi took the tissue from her hand and held her hand unintentionally. He then smiled at her. "My clothes are so dirty. Why don't you accompany me back to my room to change my shirt, Miss Feng?" Feng Ling abruptly retracted her hand and looked up at the light in CEO Yi's eyes. "I'm sorry, I didn't do it on purpose, but CEO Yi should change his clothes himself." She paused for a moment and remembered that she was in the business circle, so she couldn't be too straightforward. She simply said, "The bathroom is next door. I'll accompany you in to clean it up." "How do we clean it?" CEO Yi lowered his head and shook the red wine stain on his shirt. No matter how we clean it, this shirt is already ruined. We can't go in and wash it before wearing it, right? Why don't we go back to our room and change? My secretary isn't around. Miss Fong, come with me. Then, shall I call your secretary for you? Fong Ling still had an apologetic expression, but she had already taken a step back to maintain a proper distance. Her eyes were cold and disgusted. No need. Just accompany me, CEO said as he reached out to hold her hand. Babies, if you have monthly votes, vote. Chapter 13:18. Fong Ling looked at CEO's outstretched hand. At the same time, she saw the few people nearby who seemed to have noticed what was going on but did not even look in this direction. She finally knew his plan. The first step was to wait for the willing person to take the bait. If she was unwilling, who knew what would happen next? Why, Miss Fong, you messed up my shirt like this. Are you afraid that I'll do something to you? CEO saw that she had been politely avoiding him and his gaze turned cold. He sneered and said, "This banquet is still in progress. I'm the host of tonight's banquet. I don't think you want to see me appear so dirty, do you, Miss Fong? CEO, I can go back and compensate you with a shirt of the same style or better than this one. As for changing clothes, we're all adults, not children. We have to avoid arousing suspicion." Fong Ling said straightforwardly, "I hope CEO won't make things too difficult for me. Miss Fong, you're here to talk about financing today, right?" At this moment, CEO's secretary happened to come over with some financing information. After seeing the situation here, he seemed to have listened for a while and then walked over with a smile. "CEO, this is a chance for you to talk to him privately. Other people might not have such treatment. Miss Fong, you don't have to be too careful. Our CEO is very upright. Of course we have to talk about financing." Fong Ling's smile did not reach her eyes. "I'll definitely compensate CEO's shirt. How about this? I'll send someone to buy one for you now." Seeing that she was still avoiding talking about going back to his room to change clothes, CEO's gaze turned even colder. "Who asked you to buy a shirt?" At this moment, CEO's secretary stood by the side and changed her expression. Her expression was full of disdain. Right now, the Chinese business circle in America is really uneven. Any ignorant person can come up to manage a company. This kind of person who dirties someone's clothes and is still so proud can be invited here. Our CEO is really too good-tempered. Otherwise, a company like the Fong Corporation wouldn't even have the chance to come to Washington this time. You really think too highly of yourself. I asked you to apologize and accompany him to change clothes, but you're afraid of this and that. What can a person like you do?" Fong Ling endured it. However, although she knew that this was a trap, it still seemed like she was in the wrong. Her expression did not change, but her eyes were cold. Now, any Tom, Dick, or Harry can be a secretary. It was indeed my fault for bumping into CEO. At the same time, I've already made the compensation and apology. The most important thing now is that as a secretary, you should immediately send CEO back to change clothes. Don't you think this view is very strange? This time, Fong Ling deliberately raised her voice so that the people around her could hear the development of the situation. CEO saw her goal and narrowed his eyes. Miss Feng's temper is very stubborn. Are you sure you can survive in this circle with your personality? Whether I can survive or not depends on where I want to stand. Whether I can survive or not depends on where I want to stand. Although this billion yuan is in your hands, and I do need your company's financing, it doesn't mean that the Feng Corporation won't be able to survive without this financing. Right now, we're just giving each other a chance to cooperate. It's just a choice between getting the opportunity and losing the opportunity. Neither of them is a dead end, so why are you so decisive? Feng Ling said lightly, so, CEOE, someone with broad horizons like you will block the path of a small company like the Feng Corporation just because of a piece of clothing? You. CEOE did not speak, but the secretary did not expect her to retort. She even used such a method to hint at something. She immediately turned to look at CEOE. Our CEOE has broad horizons. He won't argue with a small character like you, but you're too insensible, the secretary said again and rolled her eyes at Feng Ling. All right, stop talking. CEOE ended the conversation in time, but his expression was not very good. Since Miss Feng doesn't like our financing, there's no need for us to communicate. I think Miss Feng has no intention of talking to us about this today. I can only wish Miss Feng good food and drink here. Does your company always cooperate with people by asking them to enter the room to change clothes? Feng Ling's tone turned cold. CEOE, I don't know if you set this rule or if it was set by your boss. So what if I said it? CEOE was obviously unhappy when he saw that she was deliberately raising her voice to let others hear their conversation. Previously, he had noticed that Feng Ling's personality was very quiet and cold. She didn't like to cause trouble, and whenever she encountered something, she would deal with it coldly. It was precisely because he had taken a fancy to this that he wanted to take advantage of this opportunity. However, he didn't expect that she wasn't someone who could completely endure it. As CEOE spoke, he suddenly reached out to grab her wrist. I don't think you're in the mood to continue discussing cooperation with others here. Why don't you come with me to find a place to have a good, detailed, and fresh chat? He enunciated the last few words very slowly, and his voice was also very low. However, Feng Ling waved his hand away and turned to leave with a cold expression. However, at this moment, 2 security guards suddenly stood by the side and blocked her way. When she saw the 2 security guards, Feng Ling's expression did not change. She looked at them coldly until CEOE walked over and stood less than half a meter behind her. He said in a low voice, Miss Feng, you're a smart person. You should have guessed something before you came. Do you think the security facilities in my villa are poor? When you entered the door, the surveillance camera at the door detected that you were equipped with a dagger and several sharp blades. I know that you are different from ordinary girls, but do you think that you have the ability to hurt people now that you are standing here? You have to know that you're no longer the daughter of the Feng family. You have the entire Feng Corporation and the Feng family behind you. If you dare to kill anyone here, we can destroy your entire Feng family. Not far away, Li Nanheng was chatting with a few businessmen and celebrities. His attitude was aloof and noble, but not arrogant. Although his expression was cold, the celebrities did not feel like they were being slighted. Suddenly, the sound of a wine glass shattering entered his ears. Chapter 13:19. Do you think you're so capable? Do you think you can do whatever you want just because you have some skills? It won't be so easy to get by here. Hearing this voice, Li Nanheng frowned slightly. He casually glanced at the crowd 20 meters away, only to see Feng Ling's figure. The man's pupils constricted slightly. When he saw that she was trapped by 2 security guards, his expression changed. Seeing this, a few businessmen and celebrities followed his gaze and looked over. Then, someone quickly went over to smooth things over and said, Boss E, what happened? Why did you start making things difficult for a woman? You're Miss Feng, right? Are you alright? The last sentence was said by the person who tried to smooth things over to Feng Ling. As he spoke, he glanced at Li Nanheng from the corner of his eyes. If he was not mistaken, CEO Li should know this person in charge of the phone corporation, and their relationship was not simple. Feng Ling did not answer. Feng Ling did not answer. She was just thinking about the door she had just passed. No wonder it looked like a door made of high-tech metal. It turned out that it had an automatic scanning function that could scan all the illegal and dangerous items on her body. No wonder CEO Yi did not use any other methods. He knew that she would not be easy to deal with, so he simply wanted to take the opportunity to see if he could take any measures that would make her give in. In the end, he failed. Miss Feng doesn't look too good. Should I ask someone to send you over to sit down and rest? The person who tried to smooth things over said and gave his assistant a look. Wait. Li Nanheng's voice was low. He turned and walked in that direction. At the same time, he said to the celebrities beside him, "Excuse me." Yu Zheng, who was following Li Nanheng, quickly stopped smiling politely at the celebrities beside him. He turned to look at CEO Li and his eyes were filled with surprise. What was CEO Li doing? Yu Zheng followed closely behind. There were two sides in her heart. One side was reminding her that if she wanted to break out of the encirclement, not to mention these two security guards, even the dozen or so security guards present might not be her match. She could just fight her way out. However, the other side was telling her that she couldn't. She had the Feng family behind her, and even if she couldn't get the 1 billion yuan, it was still necessary for her to gain a foothold in Washington. She couldn't be impulsive or use force to solve it. Just when her hand, which had just dropped the wine glass, was tightly clenching into a fist in her sleeves, restraining herself all the time. A lazy and smiling voice suddenly sounded in his ears. "Boss E, how did my woman provoke you?" This voice, the familiar voice, caused Feng Ling's cold heart to skip a beat. It was as though someone had hit her with a stick. Really, whatever you were afraid of came true. She secretly restrained her emotions and turned to see Li Nanheng approaching. CEO Yi's expression stiffened when he heard Li Nanheng's sudden words. He turned to see who it was. After seeing that it was really Li Nanheng, he then looked at Feng Ling, whose expression had become much calmer. "Who is it?" "This Miss Feng. CEO Li's woman." CEO Yi. Feng Ling did not look at Li Nanheng. She only said lightly, "I'm your guest, and Mr. Li is also your guest." "You must have heard wrongly." CEO Yi didn't understand. If he had heard wrongly, then the others couldn't have heard wrongly. However, it was clear that those who had heard this had heard Li Nanheng's words clearly. For a moment, he was unsure. He could only look at Feng Ling, who did not even like to wear a gown and rushed to the banquet in casual sportswear. Then he turned to look at Li Nanheng. Li Nanheng did not explain further. He moved his gaze away from Feng Ling's face and turned to look at the others. What happened? The secretary beside CEO Yi thought for a moment and quickly went forward to add oil to the fire. Feng Ling clearly did not do it on purpose, and the wine should not have been spilled on CEO Yi, but such a small matter had been exaggerated by the secretary. She said a lot about how cold and arrogant Feng Ling was. In short, all the fault was on her, and she described her attitude as very bad. After listening, Li Nanheng only glanced at Feng Ling indifferently. The latter did not even look at him, but her expression was cold and indifferent. If it weren't for the fact that they were in front of everyone in the business world and that Feng Ling was indeed responsible for the Feng family, she really wanted to throw this secretary over her shoulder. She didn't even sneer, but her expression was very cold, so cold that it was as if there was a certain distance between her and these people. Even if she was being framed and embellished, she just looked on coldly and didn't rush to explain. Seeing her attitude, the two security guards reached out unhappily and grabbed her wrist. "Let go." Li Nanheng stood in the crowd. His face was obviously cold and angry, and his eyes were clearly dark. At the same time, he looked at Feng Ling. Speak. I have nothing to say. Feng Ling was suddenly pointed out by the man and looked at him. It's a small matter. There's no need for Mr. Li to worry. I can solve it myself. You can solve it. Li Nanheng's low voice carried a hint of coldness that others could not understand. Earlier, he had said that she was his woman, but now it seemed like the atmosphere between the two of them was very far apart. Feng Ling glanced at him again. She recalled that it was rare for Li Nanheng to see her in such a sorry state. She had clearly said that she wanted to bet with him, but now she was the one being bullied for the sake of this 1 billion yuan. On the contrary, he did not put in any effort at all. If she made such a bet with him, it would probably be equivalent to a moth flying into a flame. Her brain was flooded with water to bet on this. Thinking of this, her face turned even colder. She did not want to say anything else and only said coldly to CEO, I'm sorry. Then, she turned around and walked out without looking back. She did not intend to give anyone any face. Feng Ling did not have the capital to be so willful in the business circle, but with Li Nanheng standing here, she suddenly only wanted to be willful once. She did not want to face him in such an embarrassing situation. Stop. The man's voice was clear and deep, but Feng Ling had already seen through his emotions. She knew that he was not angry but was just warning her not to leave willfully at this time. She originally wanted to leave, but when she thought of the Feng family and the towering tree of the Feng family, she immediately stopped in her tracks and felt a chill run down her back. Chapter 13:20. Feng Ling really wanted to scold herself for being disappointing. She usually thought that she was very powerful, but when she really fell into the mouth of this business circle, she found that she really might not be able to handle it. In the past 10 months, she had been fighting with the people in the company and had not reached out her hands to the outside world. Now that she had reached out, she realized how bad the people in this circle were. She was quiet for a moment and abruptly turned back. I've just been taught a lesson by CEO Yi. Do you have anything else to say, CEO Li? Just now, Li Nanheng had publicly said that she was his woman, but now Feng Ling had a vigilant expression on her face that said, I'm not familiar with you. Her whole body was in a state of cold vigilance, as though she might walk out at any time without looking back. At a time like this, she could still be stubborn. Li Nanheng was so angry that he laughed. He slowly unbuttoned the exquisite buttons on his collar. His aura was different from before. He really had the aura of a superior in the business circle. His black eyes were cold as he stared at her, and his voice was low and indifferent. Come here. Feng Ling's scalp went numb from his gaze. It was as though he was looking down at her when she was thrown onto the training ground at night to do devil training. She kept telling herself not to get involved with him on such an occasion. Sorry, today's occasion is not suitable for a newcomer in the business circle like me. Everyone, eat and have fun. I'd better, I told you to come over. Li Nanheng mercilessly interrupted her. The self-mocking words of a newcomer in the business circle made him frown and his gaze dark. Feng Ling clenched her hands in her sleeves. Although Yu Zheng was not particularly familiar with this Miss Feng, he could tell that CEO Li was on the verge of anger. It was clear that CEO Li wanted to help her, but why did this Miss Feng keep avoiding him? Everyone present could see that the two of them were advancing and retreating. They couldn't help but wonder what kind of relationship this Miss Feng had with Li Nanheng. Feng Ling glanced at him again and met Li Nanheng's gaze. She pondered for a moment and turned to walk back. It's just a small matter. Mr. Li really doesn't need to interfere. She looked up at his eyes and said, there's no need to make our relationship so ambiguous on this occasion. I don't want to do this. As soon as she finished speaking, Li Nanheng's black eyes narrowed coldly, and his pupils constricted. His tightly pursed thin lips curved into a mocking smile, but his expression was extremely cold. The celebrities beside the man couldn't help but shiver. The assistant, Yu Zheng, felt that this lady was courting death. Li Nanheng ignored the crowd behind him and walked to the front of the cover. Looking at her, he bent down slightly and whispered in her ear, "No matter how stubborn you are, it depends on the time. Are you sure you still want to confront me at this time?" When he spoke, there was a cold sneer in his voice. When he spat out each word, there seemed to be some ice shards in his voice. "Otherwise, do I have to admit that I'm related to you in front of so many people?" Feng Ling said and stepped back. "Think about it carefully. If this billion goes down the drain because of your temper, it won't be long before you have to prepare to marry me. I gave you face and gave you some leeway, but now you don't want to give yourself any leeway at all." The man's voice was still cold and indifferent, but there was a hint of mockery. "Where did the courage you had to make the bet with me go? It's so easy to marry you. I'm afraid I'm not used to it." As she listened, her heart pounded wildly. The bet was all because she had enough confidence, but now, this confidence had almost been wiped away. After all, AF** King appeared out of nowhere. She didn't speak. She just hated the unequal status between them. It was like this in the past, and it was like this now. But thinking about it carefully, every time in the past, he seemed to be the first to give in. Thinking of this, her eyes gradually melted a little, but there was still some stubbornness in her eyes. The biggest resentment in her heart was that she should have listened to Qin Shuk's suggestion and given up on the financing from CEOE and looked elsewhere. She shouldn't have taken this risk. In the end, she even embarrassed herself in front of Li Nanheng. Feng Ling didn't realize that the reason she was really depressed and angry was because she had made a fool of herself in front of Li Nanheng. Her heart was surging with displeasure. Seeing that she was still deliberately drawing a line between them, Li Nanheng's jaw tightened. The next second, he suddenly reached out and held her in his arms. Feeling his movements, Feng Ling retreated in shock, but was quickly pulled back by the man. The moment she fell into his arms, the man's voice was close to her ear. It was as though he was whispering, but it was as though everyone around could hear his voice. "Why are you still throwing a tantrum with me at a time like this? I just made you angry last night. Is there a need to not give your fiancé face in front of so many people?" Fiancé. Everyone was in an uproar. Feng Ling, she was about to push him away, but the man had already let go of her. At the same time, he lowered his eyes to look at her fiery gaze. There was a smile in his eyes, but that smile was clearly warning her not to speak nonsense. If he didn't let her speak, he could speak nonsense. Whose fiancé? She had only run into a wall with CEOE and had other countermeasures. It wasn't even a month yet. How could he be so shameless as to call himself her fiancé? Did she agree to it? However, in a sense, Feng Ling was also labeled as someone not to be trifled with. Li Nanheng's name was of utmost importance in the American-Chinese business world. Although he had just taken over the Li Corporation, he rarely attended these banquets. Other than the family leaders who often worked with the Li Corporation, most people had never interacted with this former young master of the Li family. However, the rumors were all about how unapproachable this man was, how abstinent he was, and how pure he was. Thus, the socialites who saw him today were all very interested in him. However, today, this man had personally broken the fantasies of those socialites. Was he already engaged? I've read a lot of comments saying that I don't understand Feng Ling's attitude recently. In fact, everyone has different feelings. Some people think that Li is wrong, while others think that Feng is going too far. In fact, as long as no one violates their principles, nothing is a big problem. It all depends on how I write it. There will be a big plot before the ending of Ling Li's side story. Currently, Ling Li's side story is almost 4/5 complete. After the ending, Qin Shi's side story will continue. As for every story and every character, regardless of whether they are good or bad, Qingqing wants to thank everyone for their company. Chapter 1321. Li Nanheng never brought a female companion to attend. It was rare for him to appear at such an event, but he actually pestered the second miss of the Feng family, who had a strange background. He even said that he was Miss Feng's fiancé. Most importantly, this second miss of the Feng family was avoiding Li Nanheng. Even though there were no major media outlets invited to this banquet, there were still some small media outlets mixed in. They had already set up their own small cameras. Especially when they saw that second Miss Feng seemed to be planning to slip away in front of Li Nanheng, the relationship between the two of them was even more curious. Logically speaking, the two of them shouldn't have any interaction, but why did it seem like they had known each other for a long time? And Li Nanheng's actions were completely unrelated to the description of him not being interested in women. Feng Ling didn't expect that Li Nanheng could use his identity as a fiancé to suppress her in public. She seemed to be frozen in place, and her expression was a little stiff. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She couldn't deny it loudly. Li Nanheng was helping her. It wouldn't be good for both of them if it hurt his face, but could she just admit it? Looking at the people surrounding the two of them, she pursed her lips and didn't speak. The man let go of her and pushed her away by an arm's length. However, his hand was still on her arm as he looked down at her. At some point, the cufflinks on the man's wrists had been undone, and his sleeves had been rolled up a little, revealing a muscular and good-looking wrist. Such an action of hugging and letting go dispelled the unapproachable and cold image of him in everyone's hearts. However, coupled with his ugly and somewhat cold expression, it still made the people around him fearful, and they didn't dare to say a word. Feng Ling looked at him, but her mind was blank. All of a sudden, CEO stood by her side and leaned closer to say, "Miss Feng is actually CEO Li's fiancée. This is really big news. I really didn't expect it." It was clear that CEO was trying his best to smooth things over. He didn't take the Feng Corporation seriously, but he didn't dare to disregard the Li family. If the two of them were together, there would be no place for financial companies in the Chinese business world in the United States. In CEO's eyes, Feng Ling's silence really matched what Li Nanheng had said earlier. She was so angry that she didn't want to pay attention to him, but she didn't want to hurt her fiancé's face in public. Thus, she was conflicted and sullen. She put on a cold face and didn't say anything. It was as if they were indeed very close to each other, but they were quarreling with each other in a cold war. Get lost. Li Nanheng's gaze swept across CEO's face like a sharp knife. GM Li. CEO's secretary said with difficulty, "Miss Feng and you are both our distinguished guests today. Earlier, it was just a small misunderstanding. It's all my fault. Earlier, our CEO didn't want to argue about the dirty clothes, but I was anxious, so I said a few harsh words. Please don't argue with a small character like me. A small misunderstanding." Li Nanheng sneered. "Standing here and speaking with such certainty, you are the one who is right and wrong. Who gave you the right?" This Miss Feng's attitude was indeed too cold and arrogant earlier. "I was anxious, so I said some harsh words. I didn't mean to do anything." CEO's secretary braced himself and said, "CEO Li, please don't make things difficult for me." At this moment, Feng Ling had regained her composure. She glanced at the secretary indifferently. Seeing Feng Ling suddenly look at him, CEO's secretary subconsciously took a small step back, afraid that Feng Ling would say something and make Li Nanheng, who didn't seem to intend to let things go, really do something here. It's a small matter. Forget it. I'll pay for CEO's clothes, but I can't fulfill CEO's other requests. As for the financing, let's wait until the financial conference to discuss it. The banquet should be a joyous occasion. Don't let my small matter dampen the mood, Feng Ling said. Since Miss Feng has said so, I think we should enjoy ourselves. It's just a small interlude, The secretary continued to smooth things over and also slightly breathed a sigh of relief. Li Nanheng still ignored her. His cold gaze landed on Feng Ling. What did CEO just ask of you? Feng Ling abruptly raised her eyes to look at him, hinting for him not to blow up this matter. She wanted to calm things down. The Feng Corporation couldn't stand too much of a storm right now. The Li Corporation was indeed not afraid of anything, but the Feng Corporation she had helped up was on the verge of collapse. She had to endure it when it was time. CEO stood by the side and stared at Feng Ling, as though afraid that if she moved her lips, she would really say what he had done to her earlier. At this moment, there was another commotion by the side. It seemed that the big shots of the financial world had come over. The people around immediately turned back and rushed in that direction. The surrounding air seemed to have become much smoother, allowing Feng Ling's somewhat muddled head to clear up. CEO Li, his assistant, Yu Jing, remembered that Li Nanheng had come today to discuss something with the big shot of the financial world. Seeing that he had approached, he stood behind Li Nanheng and reminded him in a low voice, "Are we going over now?" Or, Li Nanheng didn't seem to hear his assistant's words. He suddenly sneered and looked at Feng Ling. "Feng Ling, have you made up your mind to continue being so awkward with me?" Li Nanheng was indeed Li Nanheng. He was so arrogant that he didn't care about anyone's eyes or the occasion. Feng Ling clenched her fists and approached him with some difficulty. She said in a voice that only he could hear, "What's the matter? Can't we talk after we leave this place?" After a while, she heard the man's chuckle. "You want to avoid suspicion. Very good." He said these two words indifferently. His icy gaze finally moved away from her body. Feng Ling turned her gaze to his face. Although the man did not leave immediately, he had already turned to walk toward the crowd. "Mr. Li, nice to meet you." The big shot of the financial world stepped forward and shook Li Nanheng's hand warmly. He was clearly very old, but because of his good maintenance, he still looked bright and energetic. His eyes were filled with admiration and enthusiasm for Li Nanheng. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Mike." Li Nanheng curled his lips slightly. Although the coldness in his eyes had been retracted, there was still some hostility left. This hostility made his gaze sweep over the people around him, and there was a hint of mockery in his eyes. W. 4M. Chapter 1322. Li Nanheng and Mr. Mike went to the front to discuss matters. Feng Ling remained standing in place. When she turned back, she happened to meet Li Nanheng's gaze. Before he left, he glanced at her again, and his dark and cold eyes swept past her body. Feng Ling felt that tonight's matter was a big mistake. Firstly, she didn't expect CEOE to use such an unsightly method to test if she had any intentions of making a deal. Secondly, CEOE didn't expect Li Nanheng to care about these things, and there was such an unclear relationship between her and Li Nanheng. In fact, even she didn't expect things to develop like this. She listened to the man's footsteps as he left, turned back to pick up a glass of wine and took a sip. With the help of the slightly cold red wine, she forcefully suppressed the burning sensation in her throat that was about to emit smoke. "Miss Feng, are you okay?" Because they knew that Feng Ling and Li Nanheng's relationship was not ordinary, the people nearby noticed her. Even if they weren't familiar with her, they still quickly asked with concern. Feng Ling held the wine glass in her hand and turned back to smile lightly. I'm fine. You and CEO Li. The man was curious and hesitant, wanting to ask something. Mr. Li is joking. Feng Ling didn't want to explain further. She smiled apologetically at the man and turned to leave with the wine glass. Li Nanheng was actually very calm and rational in many things, but once she was violated or treated too rudely, whether it was in the base or here, all his calmness and rationality would disappear, and even the word magnanimous would no longer exist. He might really be able to vent his anger on all the business people present tonight. In fact, Feng Ling didn't know that she would meet him here tonight. In that situation, she didn't cooperate with him again and again. What would happen to her? Although Mr. Mike was old, he was a rather important person at tonight's banquet. What they needed to talk about were the profit-making relationships between the various companies and various general situations. The conversation lasted for about half an hour. Half an hour later, Li Nanheng scanned the audience but didn't find Feng Ling. He frowned slightly. Excuse me. The man left these words and turned to leave in large strides. Feng Ling couldn't leave just like that. After all, what happened just now wasn't over. If she left without saying a word, the greatest impact would be on the Feng Corporation's reputation in the industry. She took advantage of the fact that she didn't have anything to do and didn't need to face too many interpersonal disputes. She went to the backyard of the villa and found that there was a huge pool behind it. The pool was surrounded by a unique European-style garden. When she walked out, the waiter in the banquet hall thoughtfully handed her a coat and said that it was dark and windy outside. If she wanted to go out for some air, she should wear more clothes. After thanking him, Feng Ling put on her coat and stood by the pool, looking at the huge blue pool in front of her. The guests were still chatting and laughing in the banquet hall at the back. The back was empty. Occasionally, one or two people would pass by, but they were only the gardeners or servants of the villa. On this mountain villa, there was only such a beautiful garden installed with many lights. The night view and lighting in the garden were also perfectly designed. It would not make people feel uncomfortable because they were on the mountain. Instead, the environment was good, the air was good, and all aspects were very pleasant. The premise was that CEO didn't have those messy hobbies of seducing all kinds of women. He was really a person with good taste. Feng Ling stood silently by the pool. The wind blew past, causing a shallow layer of ripples on the pool. She stared at the shallow ripples on the waves and remembered the warning in Li Nanheng's eyes just now because she didn't cooperate. Since she had already entered the business world, she had to learn to be independent. In the past, she didn't like to rely on others for anything. Did she have to rely on Li Nanheng now? As long as he was here, many of the thorny problems she needed to face would no longer become thorny. In fact, many of the things she wanted to obtain could be obtained with a casual word from him. Such a gap was more because she was unwilling. She didn't want to, and she was unwilling to accept it. At the very least, she couldn't defeat him when they sparred in the base. Now, she still couldn't defeat him. Sometimes, Feng Ling really wondered if Li Nanheng had added infinite light and color to her life, or if he had added layers of heavy shadows. If she really couldn't get this 1 billion yuan, even if she was unwilling, she would probably be eaten by Li Nanheng in the future. Feng Ling stood for a while and prepared to return to the banquet hall. However, as soon as she turned around, a tall and slender figure suddenly bumped into her eyes. The man was leaning against the grape trellis in the garden between the villa and the pool. She didn't know how long he had been standing there. The beautiful lights in the garden behind the villa fell on his face, but his face was shrouded in the shadow under the grape trellis. She couldn't see his expression clearly. Only the flickering spark of the cigarette butt between his fingers flickered. If it was the phone Ling who was still an 11 base in the past, as long as she didn't like him, she would really turn around and leave. She didn't even want to talk to him or say a word. But that time, Li Nanheng said that he loved her for 10 years. From the time she was almost stripped naked by him in the sauna room in the orphanage, to the time she used small stones to provoke him in the jungle outside the orphanage, to the time she entered the base, to the time she was 13 years old, and to the years that followed, his shadow had always occupied a place in her life. Even she didn't expect that she would be entangled with this man for so long. 10 years. Life was impermanent. How many 10 years could one have in one's life? She knew her temper too well. She was stubborn, careful, couldn't tolerate sand in her eyes, didn't like to turn back, and was often stubborn and cold. However, Li Nanheng insisted on loving her for so many years. There had never been a messy woman by his side. Even if there was, he never gave her a chance. He didn't even give her a chance to be jealous. Although she was angry, she didn't want to force the road between the two of them to be too difficult, so she made such a bet. Either marry him and be entangled with him for the rest of her life, or they would separate and never see each other again. Perhaps it was because they had been entangled with each other for too long that she did not have the patience and energy to cultivate her relationship with another person. Even if she really had the patience to cultivate it, who would be able to enter her eyes? Xiao Ba said that she and Jin Wan were the same. They learned to love for the first time and met the best person. W. 4M. Chapter 1323. Li Nanheng suddenly appeared behind the villa. Feng Ling stood there without moving. "Come here," the man said mildly. His voice was indiscernible. Feng Ling continued to stand there without moving. Her feet seemed to be nailed to the ground. "Are you stupid? You're standing by the pool to enjoy the wind." His voice was heavy. "I'll say it again. Come here." Hearing the displeasure in his tone, Feng Ling walked over and stood about a meter away from him. They weren't too close, but it was enough for the man's face to be seen clearly in the light of the garden. His long eyelashes were lowered, and his deep black eyes were quietly sizing her up. He didn't seem to be angry. "Weren't you talking to Mr. Mike? Why did you come out?" Feng Ling asked. "The banquet inside shouldn't be over yet. It's not good for such a heavyweight like Mr. Li to suddenly disappear." In other words, she and the phone corporation were nothing in the eyes of these people. Not everyone could notice whether she was missing or not. Li Nanheng reached out to touch her face, only to feel a coldness. He furrowed his brows and used his warm palms to rub her face. He only stopped when her cheeks heated up. Feng Ling's cheeks hurt from his rubbing, but she endured it and did not say anything. This man always had some hidden stubbornness in his bones. This was not like her home, nor was it a place that belonged to the two of them. If they quarreled again, it would not be good to be seen by others. "Weren't you very strong-willed when you faced these people alone?" Li Nanheng's eyes darkened, and his tone was full of mockery. "Why did you suddenly become silent the moment I went over? Did it affect your emotions so much when you saw me?" "It doesn't affect me, but I'm not used to seeing you in such a situation." Feng Ling's expression did not change. "At least in the business world, I'm still a beginner. When there are acquaintances, it's inevitable that I will show my timidity." "Oh, you mean you're embarrassed?" The man lifted her chin and stared at her with his black eyes. "No, I was thinking about how to get my hands on that 1 billion yuan. In the end, you attracted so much attention the moment you appeared. I suddenly felt that there was no need to fight for the same resource as you. I was just thinking about changing my target. Today, CEO E was just testing me. He didn't go overboard. At least, he's more restrained than I imagined. I have my own defenses. There's no need for you to worry. Feng Ling turned her head away to avoid his hand. Hearing her words, Li Nanheng's eyes darkened. He continued to hold her chin. Even if you knew that grandson had ill intentions towards you, you still dared to come. What can he do to me? If he really does things to a certain extent, he will be the one to die. Feng Ling knew that she was being unreasonable, but she still refused to admit it. Li Nanheng sneered. Do you think this is a place where you can kill people? Do you want the Feng Corporation's reputation? Whether or not I can support the Feng Corporation depends on my own strength. With this luck, I can hold on. Without that luck, I can't do anything. Feng Ling lowered her head. However, just as he finished speaking, he felt a sharp pain in his chin. She couldn't help but frown. Li Nanheng coldly pursed his lips. Looking at her expression of enduring humiliation, the anger in his heart rose even more. He reached out and pulled the woman who could make him angry into his arms. He raised her face and kissed her heavily. Feng Ling's brows twitched from his sudden kiss and the temperature on his lips. She shivered and wanted to retreat, but the man took the opportunity to drive in and steal her breath. After kissing her fiercely for a while, he picked her up and pressed her against the wall. His hot chest imprisoned her, and the hot kiss blocked her again. Feng Ling almost lost her ability to think from his kiss. She had drunk some wine in the room. Although it was not much, she was blown by the wind for a while. The good red wine still had some alcohol in it. Her body, which was slightly cold from the wind, gradually warmed up. The heat rushed directly to her brain and then to her eyes. After a long while, Li Nanheng finally let go of her, but he was still not satisfied. He lowered his head and kissed her red and swollen lips heavily. As if it was not enough, he kissed her a second time and a third time. Feng Ling's every breath was blocked by him, making her almost unable to stand steadily. The drunkenness in her mind seemed to have become stronger. Her head was so dizzy that she knew she should push him away, but because she heard someone approaching, she did not dare to move too much, lest she attracted the attention of others. She raised her hand and tugged hard at the man's belt, trying to strangle him and remind him to let go. However, when her hand moved around his belt, her fingers rubbed against his waist. The man took a heavy breath and pressed against her forehead. His fingertips scraped the corner of her eyes, and his hoarse voice was filled with dissatisfaction. With me here, what luck do you need? You've been isolated in the Feng family, and you've gone to England to study. You've tortured me for 2 years. It's enough. Feng Ling glared at the man in front of her who wanted to get back together with her and was so angry that she was almost speechless. She wanted to say that she didn't want to torture him. She didn't have so much time to be delicate. Life had shown her the way, and she was just following that direction. He was clearly the one who was domineering and shameless. However, Li Nanheng had clearly accepted her reason for clearly feeling wronged because she left the base, but she insisted that she didn't want to give up halfway. He pressed his fingertips against her slightly red and swollen lips and explained in a low and hoarse voice, "First of all, I didn't come here today to compete with you for the 1 billion yuan, but even if I didn't compete with you and helped you pave the way, you would still lose to me in the end. I just didn't want you to lose too badly and helped you on every occasion, but you didn't accept it and insisted on being stubborn with me. Secondly, you were destined to marry me anyway. Back then, your cenotaph was already my wife in name. The word fiancé doesn't seem strange to me at all. You have to get used to it and accept it as soon as possible." Feng Ling looked at him in disbelief. He shamelessly used the word fiancé to seal his own coffin. "Li Nanheng, you really don't have any shame at all. It's enough as long as I want you." Why do I need shame? The man sneered and pinched her face with his fingers. His fingertips wrapped around her soft long hair. W4M, you're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.